She thought the worst thing that could happen tonight was running into her ex. She was wrong. Nia Brooks stood in the middle of Seattle's most expensive ballroom, champagne untouched in her hand, while 300 of the city's most powerful people laughed at her. Ethan Caldwell, the man who once told her she was the love of his life, stood at the microphone with a smirk that could cut glass. And he was still talking, still performing, still dismantling her in front of everyone who mattered in this city. And then the ballroom doors opened, and the laughter stopped. If you've never felt the specific humiliation of being made into a joke in a room full of strangers, drop your city in the comments below and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, love, and the kind of man who walks through a door and stops the world cold.
That's the
The invitation had been sitting on Nia's kitchen counter for 11 days. She'd moved it twice, once to the windowsill, once back to the counter, and both times she'd told herself she wasn't going. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering, the kind of expensive that announces itself before you even open the flap. Her cousin Danielle had personally addressed it in her careful, architectural handwriting. Ms. Nia Brooks and Guest. The and Guest had been crossed out in pencil and then erased badly, still visible if you looked close enough, which Nia had. Multiple times. She wasn't bringing a guest. She almost hadn't brought herself. It was the first Saturday in November and Seattle had turned gray and wet the way only Seattle could. Not storming, not raining hard, just relentlessly damp, the kind of cold that got into your coat before you'd even stepped outside. Nia sat on the edge of her bed in her good dress. The black one, knee-length, the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a gallery opening she'd never actually attended, and looked at herself in the mirror above her dresser. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long and had stopped pretending she wasn't. 6 months since her father died. 6 months. And she still woke up some mornings and reached for her phone to call him before her brain caught up with her hand. Raymond Brooks had been 58 years old, a careful man, the kind of man who balanced his checkbook by hand and kept paper files on everything, and never raised his voice unless something truly required it. He had died in his car, in the parking garage beneath the accounting firm where he'd worked for 22 years, of what the medical examiner's report had called cardiac arrest. Natural causes. He had no history of heart disease. His blood pressure was controlled. He walked 3 miles every morning. His doctor had given him a clean bill of health at his annual physicals 7 weeks before he died. Nia had thought about that a lot. 7 weeks. She'd thought about it, and then she'd put it somewhere in the back of her mind, the way you put things you can't do anything about. And she'd gone back to teaching 22 kindergartners at Jefferson Elementary and making lesson plans and eating cereal for dinner more often than she should. The mirror showed her a woman who needed a night out. Or at least, that's what Danielle had said when she'd called for the 4th time that week. It's just a party, Nee. You love parties. You used to be fun. Which wasn't entirely fair, but wasn't entirely untrue either. Nia put on her earrings. She called a car. She went. The Hartwell Grand occupied the entire 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of venue that required a deposit larger than Nia's monthly rent just to hold the date. Danielle had done well for herself, done well by way of Marcus Chen, the man she was marrying, whose family owned 3 tech companies and a wine label in Napa. The engagement gala had been Marcus's mother's idea, which meant it had been executed with the precise, weaponized elegance of a woman who understood that parties were not parties but demonstrations of power. Nia handed her coat to the attendant at the door and took a single breath before walking in. The room was enormous and warm, lit with amber and soft white, filled with the kind of quiet, expensive noise that money made. The clink of real crystal, the low register of conversations conducted at a volume that said, "We have nothing to prove." There were flowers everywhere, something architectural and probably imported. A quartet in the corner. Waitstaff who moved like they'd been trained for it. 300 people, minimum. Nia knew approximately 6 of them. She found the bar first, which was always the right decision. She ordered a glass of white wine she didn't intend to drink and positioned herself near a pillar where she could see the room without being too visible in it, which had been her social strategy since approximately the 7th grade and had served her well enough since. Danielle found her within 10 minutes, radiant in champagne-colored silk, grabbing both of Nia's hands and squeezing. "You came. I wasn't sure you were actually going to come." I came. You look beautiful. I look tired. You look beautifully tired. Danielle hugged her, tight and real. The kind of hug that acknowledged the 6 months without naming them. I'm so glad you're here. Marcus's people are a lot, and I need at least one human being in this room. Nia laughed. It felt strange in her chest, like a muscle she hadn't used. Where's the groom? Talking to his father about something I've already decided I don't want to know about. Come, I want to introduce you to some people. I'm fine here. Nia. Danielle, I'm fine. Go be the bride. I'll find you later. She squeezed her cousin's hand once and stepped back, and Danielle gave her the look. The one that said, I see you and I'll let you have this at the same time, before being pulled away by a woman in red who wanted to discuss the centerpieces. The room filled up around her. Nia sipped her wine and watched it happen. She was good at watching. Kindergartners taught you that, the skill of reading a room, tracking movement, sensing when something was about to go sideways before it actually did. She watched a man in a charcoal suit tell a joke to 3 people who laughed a half-second too late. She watched 2 women at the far end of the bar size up each other's jewelry. She watched the event coordinator whisper something urgent into a headset near the kitchen entrance. She wasn't watching the main doors. That was how she didn't see Ethan Caldwell come in. She only knew he was there when she heard his laugh, a particular sound, low and carry, the kind that expected the room to agree with it. Her body registered it before her brain did, a specific tightening across her shoulders, a warmth that rose in her face that she recognized as the ghost of something that used to be feeling and was now just reflex. She turned. He was standing near the entrance with 4 other people, all of them in the easy, expensive posture of people who had grown up in rooms exactly like this one. Ethan was 34 now, 2 years older than her, and he had filled out in the way of men who could afford to, broader in the shoulders, a jaw that had sharpened with age. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked, objectively and infuriatingly, good. The woman on his arm was tall and blonde and wearing something that had probably been made specifically for her body because it fit in the way that things only fit when someone spent real money making sure they would. Nia turned back to the bar. She set down her wine. She considered, briefly and seriously, leaving. She didn't leave. Later, she would ask herself why, and the truest answer she could come up with was that she'd spent 6 months retreating from things, and she was tired of the taste of it, so she stayed. She ordered a second glass of wine she also didn't intend to drink. She turned back to the room with the specific, practiced stillness of a woman who has decided that whatever happens next, it will find her standing. Ethan saw her approximately 20 minutes later. She watched it happen, watched his gaze sweep the room the way it always had, the habitual inventory of a man who liked knowing exactly what he had access to in any given space, and then watched it land on her and stop. There was a half-second of something on his face that she couldn't quite read, and then it was gone, replaced by the version of Ethan Caldwell that he performed for rooms like this one, relaxed, assured, faintly amused by everything. He excused himself from his group. He walked toward her. Nia held very still. Nia Brooks. He said her name the way he used to, like it was a thing he owned. I didn't know you were part of the Hartwell crowd. Danielle's my cousin. Right, I remember. He didn't remember. She could tell by the slight recalibration in his expression. You look. He paused, and something moved behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with what he said next. Exactly the same. She knew what that meant. It meant you haven't changed, you haven't grown, you're still standing in the same place I left you. You look like Seattle, she said. He smiled, not sure if that was a compliment. How are things? Still teaching? Still teaching. Kindergarten? Kindergarten. He nodded slowly with the expression of a man who found this information both expected and slightly sad. That's great. That's good work, Nia. Good work. The way you talk to someone about a hobby. How's your father? She asked, because she was not above drawing a small amount of blood. Something tightened at the corners of his eyes. He's well. He's here, actually. He gestured vaguely across the room to where a silver-haired man stood talking to a cluster of people who were all leaning toward him slightly, the way people lean toward money and authority. Charles Caldwell. She'd met him twice. He'd looked through her both times. "Tell him I said hello," Nia said. Ethan's smile sharpened. "I'll do that." He glanced back at his group, where the blonde woman was watching with an expression of polite territorial awareness. "I should get back. It was good to see you, Nia, really." She said nothing. He left. Nia stood there for a moment with both her wine glasses and felt the familiar arithmetic of an old wound. Not the sharp pain of something fresh, but the dull, specific ache of something that had healed wrong. She'd loved him once, in the specific and terrible way of someone who'd confused intensity for depth. They'd been together for nearly 2 years. He'd ended it in a text message. She'd spent 3 months eating her feelings and another 3 convincing herself she didn't have any. That had been 4 years ago. She was fine. She moved away from the bar and found a position near the windows, where Seattle spread out below in the dark, all wet lights and the black shape of the sound in the distance. She was fine. She was going to spend an appropriate amount of time here, congratulate her cousin, and go home to her apartment and her cat and the stack of student drawings on her kitchen table, and she was going to be completely, entirely unbothered. That lasted 45 minutes. The trouble started when Danielle's future mother-in-law, Helena Chen, architecture of the party, woman in red, took the microphone from the quartet's stand and tapped it twice for silence. The room quieted in the obedient way of people who understood they were guests in someone else's demonstration. Helena gave a brief, warm speech about Marcus and Danielle that managed to be both genuine and controlled, the kind of speech you gave when you approved of the match, but wanted everyone to understand it had been a careful decision. Marcus said a few words. Danielle cried and then laughed, and then said something that made the room laugh genuinely. Then, for reasons that would later seem incomprehensible, Helena invited other guests to share brief toasts if they wished. Ethan Caldwell took the microphone. He started well, or what seemed like well. He talked about Marcus. They'd grown up together, apparently, same private school, same tennis club, same social coordinates. He said the expected things about Marcus finding the right woman, about Danielle being extraordinary. He was smooth at it the way he was smooth at everything, the charm that had once made Nia feel chosen. And then she would never be entirely sure how it happened, whether it was calculated or whether it was the second drink or whether it was simply who Ethan Caldwell was underneath the performance. He said her name. "You know, being here tonight, I was actually reminded of someone." His eyes found her across the room, and he smiled, easy and ruinous. "I ran into an old girlfriend earlier, Naya. Some of you might remember her. She was around for a while a few years back." A small laugh from a few people nearby. Sweetheart of a woman, kindergarten teacher, one of those people who just... He paused, seeming to search for the word, and the pause was its own performance. Stays the same. You know the type. The world changes, and some people just stay exactly where they were. The room felt it. The slight shift, the attention realigning toward her, the soft murmur of people deciding what to do with the discomfort they were being offered. Nia did not look away from him. She held his gaze with both hands. "I remember thinking when we were together," Ethan continued, and now there was something in his voice that was enjoying itself, that she had all this potential. But some people are more comfortable with small lives, aren't they? And there's something admirable about that, I suppose. Knowing your level, staying in your lane. He lifted his glass. To Danielle and Marcus, who always knew to reach higher. The toast was drunk. And the laughter came. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. The soft, complicit laughter of people who were relieved not to be the subject of the joke. Nia felt it in her sternum, that specific humiliation, the kind that worked not because it was wholly untrue, but because it landed in the places where you'd already hurt yourself thinking the same things in the dark at 3 a.m. Small life. Knowing your level. Her father's face came to her. The way he'd looked at her graduation, the pride in him that he'd worn like something physical. And she felt something hot move through her chest that was not sadness and not anger, but something between them that didn't have a clean name. She was going to set down her glass and walk out. She'd decided. She would find Danielle later, explain, apologize. She would walk out through those double doors and get in a car and not let Ethan Caldwell have another single moment of her. The ballroom doors opened. The sound they made was not particularly loud. The noise of a door, unremarkable. But the effect that rippled through the room was something else entirely. A wave of silence that moved from the back of the space forward, killing conversation after conversation the way a stone kills the surface of water. Nia watched it happen, watched 300 people go quiet in sequence, watched the expressions change from the social party ease to something else, something that involved a very specific kind of awareness. She turned. He was tall. That was the first thing, taller than she'd expected, which was already saying something, because the impression he made entered the room before his actual dimensions did. He wore black, a suit that looked like it had been built around the particular geometry of his body, and he moved through the entrance the way people move through spaces when the spaces belong to them. Behind him, at a slight and practiced distance, 4 men in dark clothing positioned themselves without drawing attention to the positioning, which meant they were very good at what they were doing because Nia noticed it anyway. His face was Korean, late 30s, she guessed, though he had the particular composure of men who had been through enough that age had settled into them differently. He had a jaw that looked like it had been clenched against something difficult for a very long time. His eyes moved across the room with a methodical calm, the way you scanned an environment when you had trained yourself to know where every exit was and where every threat might come from. The room stayed silent. Ethan Caldwell had gone very still. He was still holding the microphone. He had forgotten it was in his hand. The man walked into the ballroom with the unhurried certainty of someone who did not require permission for anything, and his eyes moved through the crowd, not searching exactly, but settling until they landed on Nia. And then he walked directly toward her. No hesitation, no greeting to the hosts, no scan of familiar faces, no social calculation. He crossed the space between them with the straight-line efficiency of a man who had a destination, and everything else was geography. The people in his path stepped aside. They did it the way people stepped aside for something they couldn't name but understood, instinctively, to be real. Nia stood exactly where she was because she didn't know what else to do. He stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see that his eyes were dark and very still, the kind of still that was not emptiness but depth, something that went down a long way. He looked at her face with an attention that was not the attention of a stranger, and she felt something in her chest shift in a way she didn't understand and couldn't account for. His hand came up. 2 fingers, placed gently beneath her chin, tilting her face up by the smallest degree. And then he kissed her. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not performative, though the entire room was watching. It was brief and soft and carried an authority that had nothing to do with force, the authority of someone who was making a statement and doing not want to be misunderstood. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. When he pulled back, his hand stayed at her jaw for a moment longer. Then he turned to face the room, and he put his arm around her waist, not possessively, not dramatically, but in the easy, practiced way of a man who had done this many times. And he said, in a voice that carried without being raised, "My wife." That was all. My wife. 300 people processed this information in silence. Ethan Caldwell's face had gone the color of old ash. The man, her apparent husband, reached past her to pick up the wine glass she'd set on the table beside her and placed it gently in her hand. Then he leaned down slightly, his mouth near her ear, and said quietly and in English, "I will explain everything. Please don't say anything for the next 3 minutes." She was either going to throw the wine at him or she was going to stand very still and figure out what was happening. She chose the second option. She was a kindergarten teacher. She was good at staying calm while unprecedented things unfolded around her. "You must be the groom," the man said, turning toward Marcus, who was standing nearby with an expression of absolute, genuine bewilderment. He reached out and shook Marcus's hand with the measured warmth of someone performing normalcy very deliberately. "Kang Tae-jun, congratulations." Nia watched Marcus's face work through several stages of recognition, and then land somewhere that looked like the specific alertness of a man who had just understood something she hadn't yet. Marcus recovered himself quickly, shook the hand, said the appropriate words. Danielle appeared at Nia's elbow, close enough to whisper, "What is happening right now?" "I have no idea," Nia whispered back. "That's Nia. That's... I know. Do you, though? Do you actually..." "Danielle." Nia kept her voice level and her expression neutral because 300 people were still watching. "Not right now." Her cousin made a sound that was equal parts terror and fascination, and then smiled the smile of a woman who was going to need the complete story at the earliest possible opportunity. Tae-jun turned back to Nia. He had the particular quality of someone who was never entirely in one conversation, always also monitoring the room around him, tracking variables. But when he looked at her, the monitoring paused. Just slightly. "I apologize for the entrance," he said, low enough for only her. "That's what you're apologizing for." Something moved near his mouth, not quite a smile. "We should go somewhere quieter. I think we should go somewhere and you should tell me who you are and why you just kissed me in front of 300 people. That's what I mean by quieter." He glanced toward the doors and then back at her. "I have a car waiting." "I don't get in cars with strangers." "I know who your father was," he said. She went very still. His name was Raymond Brooks. He worked for a firm called Hargrove and Associates for 22 years. He died 6 months ago, and the official cause was cardiac arrest, and you have spent 6 months not quite believing that. He said it evenly, without cruelty, just information. "I need you to know that you were right not to believe it." The room had resumed its noise around them, the careful post-incident recovery of a crowd deciding how to metabolize what they'd witnessed. Ethan Caldwell had moved away from the microphone and was talking to someone who appeared to be trying to help him do the same. Charles Caldwell, she noticed, was watching his son from across the room with an expression that was entirely too controlled. "How do you know those things about my father?" she asked. "Because your father saved my life," Tae-jun said, "and the man who killed him is standing 30 feet away from us." Nia turned and looked at Charles Caldwell, who was still watching his son, and felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet. Not literally, just the internal version of it. The feeling of a thing you'd half known snapping into sudden, terrible clarity. "Give me 10 minutes, Tae-jun said. "In the car. If after 10 minutes you want to come back in here and never see me again, I will make sure you're never troubled by any of this. But I think you'll stay." She turned back to look at him. He was watching her with that steady, fathomless attention. "You kissed me," she said. "In front of everyone." "Yes." Without asking. "There wasn't time to ask. I'm sorry for that specifically." "You're going to have to do a lot better than sorry." "I know." And the way he said it, not defensive, not charming, just plain and direct, was so different from every apology she'd ever been offered by a man who expected the apology to be enough that she felt something in her chest shift again. She picked up her wine glass from where he'd placed it. She took one sip. She set it back down. 10 minutes, she said, and I'm not sitting in the back seat. Something that might have been surprise crossed his face. Front seat. Don't push it. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The car was a black Mercedes idling at the curb outside the hotel entrance, and there was a second car directly behind it. Tae-jun opened the front passenger door for her. She noticed the driver's slight, barely perceptible adjustment at this, as if it was unexpected, and she got in without letting herself think too hard about it. He got in the back, which meant, she realized, that she was the only one in the front, with his driver on the other side of a piece of dividing privacy glass that rose without being asked. You said 10 minutes, she said to the privacy glass. It lowered 3 inches. Your father's name, Tae-jun said, was Raymond Elias Brooks. He was born in Tacoma in 1965. He got his accounting degree from the University of Washington in 1987. He spent his career at Hargrove and Associates, where he specialized in corporate financial audits. He coached youth basketball until you were 16. He made you a birthday cake every year, from scratch, not a box, even after you left for college. He called you every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. He drove a 2009 Honda Accord Silver that he refused to replace because the engine was still good. Nia sat very still. He came to me 13 months ago, Tae-jun said. He'd found something in the course of an audit for a client. Something significant. He needed protection while he figured out what to do with it, but he couldn't go to the authorities because what he'd found went into the authorities. So he came to me. Why you? Because he knew what I was, and he knew that the people he was afraid of were afraid of me. She turned in the seat to look at him through the partial gap. He was sitting in the back seat with the stillness of someone who did not need to fill silence with movement, looking back at her. What are you? She asked. You already know the answer to that, he said. She did. She'd placed it the moment Marcus's face had changed when he'd said his name. The specific recognition of a man hearing something that existed in a register above ordinary society. She'd grown up in Seattle. She'd heard things. She just hadn't expected to be sitting in a car with him having this particular conversation. Kang Tae-jun, she said. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't need to. My father went to a mafia boss for help. He went to someone who operated outside the systems that had been compromised, Tae-jun said. He was practical. He didn't have a lot of options, and he was running out of time, and he made a decision. Did you help him? A pause. I tried. I gave him protection, resources, time. What I couldn't give him was more time than the people following him were willing to allow. He said it without looking away from her. He died before we could finish what we'd started together, and I was not able to prevent it, which is, something moved across his face that was not easy to look at directly. That is a failure I carry. The city passed outside the windows. The car hadn't moved. She realized they were still at the curb. You called it a fake marriage, she said. Back there, you said I was your wife. Charles Caldwell's people have been watching you for 6 months, Tae-jun said. They believe your father left something behind, evidence. They don't know if he told you about it or passed anything to you, but they can't take the risk that he did. As long as you're an ordinary woman living an ordinary life, you're... He stopped. He chose his words with the care of someone who understood exactly what they were carrying. You're a loose end, the easiest kind to deal with. Nia felt the cold settle into her chest, clean and specific. But as my wife, he continued, you're untouchable. Any move against you is a move against the Kang organization. The Caldwells are powerful, but they are not interested in that war. Not yet. Not yet. Things will move quickly from here. She stared out through the windshield at the wet Seattle street, the reflected orange of the streetlights in the puddles, the dark shapes of people moving along the sidewalk without knowing anything was wrong. Just a regular Saturday night for everyone in her line of sight. She thought about her father, his careful hands, his Sunday calls, the birthday cakes from scratch. And she thought about a man in a parking garage in a silver 2009 Accord that he'd refused to replace because the engine was still good. She thought about the expression on Charles Caldwell's face when Tae-jun had walked into that ballroom. Not surprise, not alarm, something much more deliberate than either of those things, recognition and calculation. You said he left something behind, she said. Evidence. I believe so. He was careful. He was the most careful man I've met in a long time. Tae-jun said this with something that sounded like genuine, unglamorized respect. But I don't have it, and the Caldwells don't have it, which means it's somewhere. And you think I know where. I think your father trusted you more than anyone else in the world, he said, which means if he left you a way to find it, you might not know you have it yet. And that's what makes the next few days dangerous. She sat with that for a moment. If I say no, she said, if I get out of this car right now and go back in there and go home, then I drive away and you are protected for as long as I can make it possible to protect you without your cooperation, he said. But eventually the Caldwells will decide that the risk is worth it. And when they do, there will be nothing I can do from a distance. That's not much of a choice. No, he agreed. It isn't. I'm sorry. She turned back to look at him. You keep apologizing for things, she said. Is that unusual for you? He considered this with the seriousness she was beginning to understand was simply how he inhabited questions. Yes, he said. Why me, specifically? Why is he apologizing specifically to me? Because you didn't choose any of this, he said. Your father chose to fight. That was his right. You didn't choose to be his daughter, which... A beat. There are things we inherit that we have no say over. The least I can do is be honest about what I'm asking you to walk into. She thought about the laugh that had moved through the Hartwell Grand Ballroom 40 minutes ago. She thought about Ethan Caldwell's mouth forming the words small life with the confidence of someone who'd never had to earn the right to stand in any room he'd entered. She thought about her father, who'd walked into a parking garage and not walked out. Tell your driver to take us to wherever you were planning to take us, she said. Tae-jun was quiet for a beat. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said. But I'm going. He said something in Korean. The privacy glass rose. The car pulled away from the curb. Nia faced forward and watched Seattle move past her and thought, this is the moment. This is the exact moment. The before and after of her life were separating right now, clean as a cut, and the part of her that had spent 6 months being careful and contained and fine was still back there on the curb. She didn't look back. The penthouse was on the 41st floor of a residential tower in South Lake Union, and it took 4 keyed access points to reach it from the lobby. The elevator opened directly into the space, which meant the elevator itself was the threshold. You were either inside the protection or you weren't. Nia stepped out and took it in. The space was large and spare and precise, the kind of apartment that had been designed by someone who knew exactly what they wanted and had the means to insist on it completely. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides showing the city and the sound, and far out, the dark bulk of the Olympic Peninsula. Furniture that was built for actual use and not performance. Books on shelves that looked red. A kitchen that showed evidence of real cooking. She noticed that, the slight disorder of a space that functioned. 2 men were already there. They acknowledged Taijun with nods that communicated information she couldn't read. Status reports in the language of people who worked together long enough to compress full sentences into a tilt of the chin. Taejun said something to them and they withdrew through a door she hadn't initially noticed, which meant the apartment had rooms she wasn't seeing yet. He turned to her. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? You kissed me in front of 300 people and now you're offering me coffee. Water then. Water is fine. He moved to the kitchen. She stood near the windows and looked out at the city she'd lived in her entire life, and which looked from up here like something else entirely, like a map of itself, abstracted, all the distances collapsed and reorganized. The man who killed my father, she said without turning. You're certain it was Charles Caldwell? As certain as I can be without the evidence your father died finding. And Ethan? A pause, water being poured. Ethan Caldwell has always been his father's instrument. Whether he knew the extent of what his father was doing, he came to stand nearby, not close, and handed her the glass. I believe he knew enough. She drank the water. It was cold. Her hands were steadier than she expected them to be. When I was with him, she said, and was surprised to find she could say it without the old ache. Maybe because everything had shifted scale tonight, and 4-year-old heartbreak felt like a very small thing from where she was standing. When I was with Ethan, I met his father twice. Both times Charles looked at me the way you look at something that's slightly below the threshold of being worth your attention. She paused. But he always asked about my father, very casually. How was Raymond? Did he enjoy his work? Was he planning to retire soon? I thought it was just small talk, making an effort. Taejun was watching her with that attention that had weight to it. He was mapping him, Nia said. He was checking on him. Yes. Through me. She felt the specific quality of this, the retroactive violation of it. He put Ethan with me to run surveillance on my father. I don't know when the surveillance began, Taejun said carefully, or whether your relationship with Ethan Caldwell was entirely engineered. I can't tell you that. What a thoughtful thing not to tell me. I thought about not saying the other part at all, he said, but you asked directly. She set down the glass. She folded her arms, not defensively, just to have something to do with her body while her mind worked through it. She was good at this, actually, the structured processing of information that her emotional brain wanted to run from. You had to be, in a classroom of 22 5-year-olds. You had to be able to stay calm and think in sequence even when everything around you was unmanageable. All right, she said. So the arrangement, fake marriage, what does it actually require? Taejun set his own glass down. He looked at her with the careful regard of someone who is deciding how much to explain and in what order. For it to be credible, it needs to be consistent. You'll live here. There's a separate room. You'll have complete privacy. You'll be present for certain public appearances, certain events. You'll wear a ring. You'll be seen with me in contexts that make the arrangement visible to people whose understanding of it matters. For how long? Until we locate your father's evidence and do something effective with it. He paused. Weeks. Possibly longer. I have a job. We can work around your job. I have 22 kindergartners who need their teacher. Something in his expression shifted. Not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition. I know, he said. We'll work around it. She studied his face. He was not what she'd expected. She wasn't sure exactly what she'd expected, but it wasn't this. This particular combination of deliberateness and what seemed against everything that should have been true about a man in his position, like an actual conscience. My father trusted you, she said. He did. Was that a mistake? The question sat between them for a moment. He didn't look away from it. I believe, he said, slowly, that he trusted me with the thing that mattered most to him, and I failed to keep it safe. He meant her. She understood that. So the answer to your question is, I don't think trusting me was the mistake. I think the mistake was mine. That's an honest answer. I try to be. Mafia bosses don't usually lead with honesty. I don't lead with it, he said. I offer it to people who've earned it. She looked at him for a long time. The city burned below them in the dark, indifferent and massive, and somewhere in it Charles Caldwell was having a very different kind of night than the one he'd planned. Separate room, she said. Separate room. I keep my own schedule for work. Of course. And when this is over, she said, however it ends, I go back to my life. He was quiet for a beat longer than the others. Yes. She wasn't sure in that last pause what she'd heard. Not hesitation exactly. Something under it. Show me the room, she said. He showed her the room. It was large and quiet and had windows that looked north toward the dark water. There were things in it that suggested she'd been expected, not assumed, she thought, but hoped. A small thing. But she held on to it. She stood in the unfamiliar room in her good black dress, listening to the night city 41 floors below, and thought about her father, his careful handwriting, his Sunday calls, the way he'd held her at her mother's funeral and not said a single word because he'd understood that what she needed was not words, but the specific gravity of being held by someone who would not let go. Finish what I started, Nybird. She hadn't heard his voice. He wasn't here. But she knew, with the specific certainty of a daughter who'd understood her father deeply and completely, that if he'd had something left to say, it would have been exactly that. She wasn't done being afraid. She wasn't done grieving. She wasn't done being a woman who'd walked into an engagement party expecting the worst thing to be running into her ex. But she was here. She was standing. She would figure out the rest. She didn't know yet, couldn't know, that the encrypted drive her father had died for was already in her possession. Had been for 6 months. Sitting in a cardboard box of his things in her storage unit in Beacon Hill, inside a birthday card he'd mailed her 3 weeks before he died, addressed in his careful handwriting, with a note that said only, "For when you need it, Nybird. You'll know." She didn't know yet, but she would. Tit. 2 floors below the penthouse, in the building's security monitoring room, one of Tae-jun's men was watching a separate feed when a notification arrived on the encrypted line. He read it once. He read it again. He reached for the phone. The Caldwells had already made their first move, and it wasn't aimed at Tae-jun. The notification read 4 words. They went to her apartment. Tae-jun's man, Jin-ho, 26, ex-military, the one whose hands never shook, read it twice in the blue light of the monitoring room and then picked up the phone and called upstairs. He said what he needed to say in 11 seconds. He hung up. He pulled up the external camera feeds for Naya's building in Beacon Hill and found the timestamp and watched, at 1x speed, 2 men in a gray sedan park across the street from her building at 11:47 p.m. They hadn't gone in. They were just sitting there, engine running, watching the front entrance, waiting to see if she came home. Upstairs, Tae-jun was already putting on his jacket. Nia heard the knock at the bedroom door and felt the specific dislocation of someone waking up in an unfamiliar space, the wrong ceiling, the wrong light, the wrong quality of silence. And then the night came back to her in sequence, and she sat up in the dark with her heart going too fast. "Ms. Brooks," Tae-jun's voice through the door. "I need you awake." She checked her phone. 12:14 a.m. She'd been asleep for maybe 40 minutes, still in her dress, shoes off, lying on top of the covers in the unconscious survival sleep of someone whose body had decided it was shutting down regardless of circumstances. I'm awake, she said. There are people outside your apartment building. She was up and at the door in 3 seconds. He was standing in the hallway in his jacket, fully dressed, looking like he hadn't slept and didn't plan to. Behind him, Jin-ho and another man she hadn't been introduced to were positioned with the alert stillness of people doing a specific job. Watching it, Taejun said before she could ask. Not entering. Not yet. Not yet. She repeated it back to him. We don't think they know you're here. They're checking whether you came home. And when I don't, they'll report in. Then it depends on what their instructions are. Naya leaned against the doorframe and pushed her hair back from her face and tried to find the version of herself that was functional at 12 in the morning on no sleep with surveillance outside her apartment. They were fast, she said. We only left the gala. The Caldwells have had people on you for months, Taejun said. Tonight changed the nature of their interest, not the fact of it. She took that in. Months. She thought about the car that had sat a little too long on her street 2 weeks ago, the thing she'd noticed and dismissed. The colleague at school who'd asked one too many oddly specific questions about her family and then transferred districts without explanation. My cat, she said. A beat. What? I have a cat. She's in the apartment. She held his gaze. Her name is Harriet, and she's 12 years old, and she has a kidney condition, and she needs her medication twice a day. Taejun looked at her with the expression of a man encountering a variable he hadn't modeled for. Your cat? Yes. He turned to Jin-ho and said something in Korean. Jin-ho's expression remained neutral in the particular way of someone who had been trained never to react to unusual instructions, but something around his eyes suggested this was possibly a first. Jin-ho will go to your apartment through the service entrance, Taejun said. He'll need your keys and the medication instructions. Nia went back into the room and got her keys from her bag and wrote down the medication on a piece of paper. Dosage, timing, where it was kept, what Harriet's preferred carrier was, what would happen if you picked her up wrong. She handed both to Jin-ho, who looked at the paper for a moment and then looked at Taejun and then back at the paper. The gray carrier, she told him. She'll scream. She always screams. But she'll be fine once she's in. Jin-ho left without a word. Nia stood in the hallway in her black dress at 12:15 in the morning and felt the absurdity of it press against the terror of it in a way that was almost unbearable. Almost. Is there coffee? She said. Taejun made coffee. They sat at the kitchen island, him on one side, her on the other, and the coffee was good, which seemed important somehow. And outside the city went on being the city regardless of anything. I need to tell you more than I've told you, he said. I figured. Some of it is going to be difficult. My father is dead. I'm in your penthouse at midnight because 2 men are sitting outside my apartment in a gray sedan. I'm already past difficult. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Tell me, he told her. The Caldwell organization, he explained, was not the collection of investment firms and real estate holdings that it presented to Seattle's business community. That surface was real, but it was also a membrane, thin, permeable, there to absorb scrutiny and release it. Underneath was a financial architecture that had been built over 30 years, layered and self-obscuring, routing money from sources that couldn't appear in any legitimate record through a network of shell entities, numbered accounts, and complicit intermediaries. How much money? Nia said. Over the period your father was auditing, conservatively, north of 400 million. She set her mug down. 400. The number your father arrived at was 437 million over 12 years, with documentation. She sat with that number and felt it restructure something in her understanding of the world. $437 million. The weight of that kind of money, what it bought, what it required, what it could justify in the minds of people who moved it. The auditing firm, she said, Hargrove and Associates. Did they know? The senior partners knew, or chose not to know, which in that context is the same thing. Your father was brought onto the Caldwell account 3 years ago when the previous auditor retired. He was chosen because he had a 20-year track record of doing the work exactly as assigned. He was thorough and he was honest, and nobody thought a man in his late 50s with a clean record was going to pull on a thread that 12 years of careful construction had left barely visible. But he did. He found a single discrepancy in a subsidiary report, something that didn't reconcile. A rounding error, essentially, but in a direction that made no sense given the stated volume of transactions. Most auditors would have caught it and flagged it as a data entry issue and moved on. Taejun paused. Your father went back 6 years. Nia thought about her father's study at the house she'd grown up in. The wall of files, the color-coded tabs, the way he'd explained to her when she was 9 years old that numbers were honest if you knew how to listen to them. They can't lie, Niebird. People lie. Numbers just tell the truth about what people did. Her throat tightened. She made it stay. When did he come to you? She said. 8 months before he died. He'd been sitting on what he found for 4 months by then, trying to figure out what to do with it. He'd gone to a friend in the state AG's office, informally, off the record. That friend had gone to someone they trusted. Within 48 hours, your father got a phone call. Taejun's voice was flat and precise, carrying the information without performance. He didn't know the voice. The voice told him that what he'd found was not his to act on, and that his family was beautiful, and that he should think carefully about what a comfortable retirement looked like. Nia felt the cold run the length of her spine. He didn't stop, she said. No. Of course he didn't. She looked at her hands on the mug. Of course he didn't stop. He came to me because the Caldwells' reach into conventional institutions was too deep to use those institutions against them, Taejun said. He needed somewhere to store what he'd found, somewhere it couldn't be reached, somewhere outside the networks the Caldwells could access. And he needed protection while he built a case that could survive an attempt to suppress it. You gave him that. I gave him what I could. We had a system, regular contact, a protocol, backup locations for the documentation. But the Caldwells moved faster than we planned. They'd had someone inside the audit firm who was monitoring his work, and when he started pulling certain records, that person flagged it. By the time I understood the timeline they were working on, there were 4 days left. Something in Taejun's face changed. Not dramatically, not a break, just a deepening of the stillness. I missed it by 4 days. He was not saying I'm sorry again. He was saying something harder than sorry. He didn't tell me any of this, Nia said. He was protecting you. I know that. Her voice came out sharper than she meant. She breathed once and pulled it back. I know that. I'm not angry at him for it. I'm angry that he was in that parking garage alone because the people who were supposed to protect him missed it by 4 days, and I'm angry that I spent 6 months thinking it was a heart attack and going to his grave, and... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. Taejun didn't say anything. He didn't offer comfort or apology or the reflexive human noise people made in the presence of other people's grief. He just sat across from her and stayed present in it, which was, she would realize later, exactly the right thing. The evidence, she said, when she could. You said you don't have it. No. When he died, whatever he was holding on to, the final, compiled package, it wasn't in any of the locations we'd established, which means he moved it deliberately, before the end. He looked at her across the island. He was that careful. You think he sent it to me? I think he trusted you more than any protocol we could have built, and I think he was thorough enough to make sure the most important things survived even if nothing else did. She thought about the storage unit in Beacon Hill, the box of his things from the office that she'd picked up 2 weeks after the funeral and couldn't bring herself to go through, so she'd taped it and put it in the unit with his winter coats and the 2 boxes of her mother's things that he'd kept for 20 years, and she'd never been able to get rid of. She thought about it, and then she put it aside because she wasn't ready. And because there were more immediate things to understand first. Tonight, she said, Ethan, when you walked in, you knew he'd be there. We knew the Caldwells would have people at the event. Marcus Chen's family operates in spaces the Caldwells move through. I didn't know Ethan would be there personally. But you came for me specifically. You knew I'd be there. I've known your movements for 2 months, he said. For your safety. I kept distance until tonight made distance impossible. She looked at him steadily. 2 months. Yes. You were watching me for 2 months and didn't... What would I have said to you? He asked it without defensiveness, straight and real. Your father asked me not to contact you. He said you'd been through enough. He wanted the evidence to be enough. He wanted to finish it without pulling you into it. After he died, I respected that as long as I could. and tonight you stopped respecting it. Tonight, Ethan Caldwell had a microphone in a room full of people, and he was looking at you in a way that meant a decision had already been made. His jaw tightened once. I didn't plan the entrance. I planned to speak with you privately. But when I came through that door and I saw where you were standing and where he was standing, there wasn't time for private. She absorbed that. The ballroom, the microphone, the laugh that had moved through the room like something contagious, Ethan's eyes finding her the way they had across all that distance. And then the doors. You made yourself a target, she said, walking in there like that, claiming me publicly. That's a provocation to the Caldwells. Yes. They'll move against you now. They'll try to understand what it means first, he said. Charles Caldwell is not impulsive. He'll take 48 hours to assess. That gives us time. Time for what? To find what your father left. Nia looked at him across the kitchen island in the quiet of a 41st floor apartment at 12:30 in the morning and understood, with the specific clarity that only came when everything else was stripped away, that she was no longer in the part of the story where decisions were still theoretical. She was in it. She had been in it since her father walked into a parking garage 6 months ago, and she just hadn't known it. There's a storage unit, she said. She told him about the unit. Not everything. She wasn't ready to tell him about the birthday card, partly because she wasn't certain, partly because she needed to see it herself first before she handed it to anyone else, even him. But she told him about the box from her father's office, told him it hadn't been opened. Taejun listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. We go in the morning, he said, before the Caldwells have had time to pull together a surveillance update. They might already have the unit flagged. Possibly. We go carefully. She nodded. She finished her coffee. She was thinking about whether she should tell him more. The birthday card, the instruction written in her father's handwriting, when the other man, the one she hadn't been introduced to, appeared in the kitchen doorway and said something to Taejun in Korean. Taejun's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes did. What? She said. He looked at her. Jin-ho is at your apartment. And? The gray sedan is gone. She waited. That wasn't the thing that had changed his eyes. Someone else was in your apartment before him, Taejun said. Not recently, sometime in the past week. The bedroom and the study showed evidence of a professional search. The coffee in her stomach went cold. They were thorough enough that most people wouldn't have noticed, he said. Jin-ho noticed. They were already in my apartment. She said it aloud to make it real. Before tonight. They were already inside. Before tonight. She thought about every night she'd slept in that apartment in the past week. Every morning she'd woken up and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table without knowing that someone had been through her things with professional hands. Did they find anything? If they had found what they were looking for, Taejun said, you would not have been at that gala tonight. He meant it practically, clinically, and it was somehow the most frightening sentence of the entire night because of how straightforward it was. Harriet, she said. Jin-ho has her. She screamed. She's fine. Nia pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum once, a grounding pressure, and breathed through the hot surge of something that was not quite fear and not quite fury, but lived in the shared territory between them. Okay, she said. You should sleep. I'm not going to sleep. Nia. It was the first time he'd used her first name without the formality of Ms. Brooks, and it landed differently than she expected. Not too familiar, not intimate exactly, just direct, like he'd decided something. You're going to need everything you have in the next 48 hours. 4 hours of sleep is better than none. She wanted to argue. She had a very good argument prepared, something about how she was the one whose apartment had just been searched, and whose father had just posthumously been confirmed murdered, and whose ex-boyfriend had apparently been complicit in her father's surveillance. And she felt she had every right to spend the night being awake and furious about it. Instead, she said, 4 hours? 4 hours. She pushed back from the island. She stopped. The man your man doesn't know, she said. The one at my apartment. The one who searched my apartment. Was that Ethan? Did he send someone? Taejun looked at her for a beat. We don't know yet. But you think so? He didn't answer. His not answering was his answer. She went back to the room with the north-facing windows and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought about 4 years of her life and what she'd built in that time. The apartment she'd furnished slowly and carefully, the classroom she'd decorated in October with hand-cut leaves, the small routines and the cat and the Sunday calls she still ached for missing, and she thought about how much of that had been built in a life that someone else had been quietly mapping. She lay down. She did not sleep. At 6:15 in the morning, Taejun knocked on the door and she was already dressed. He looked at her. "I told you to sleep," he said. "I told you I wasn't going to." A pause. "There's something you should see." He led her to a room she hadn't been in, a workspace at the back of the apartment, 3 monitors on a long desk, Jin-ho sitting in front of them with Harriet somehow already installed on his lap. The old cat turned in the inscrutable way of cats who had decided that a situation was survivable and had proceeded accordingly. Jin-ho looked as surprised by this as he was capable of looking. "She likes warm things," Nia said. On the center monitor was a photograph, time-stamped 11:03 p.m., the previous night. Taken, she understood from the angle, from the building's external camera, which meant it was Tae-jun's camera, and his people had been watching her building long before last night. The photo showed a man entering the service entrance of her apartment building. Not the gray sedan man. A different man, alone, carrying nothing. She didn't recognize him. "Caldwell employee," Tae-jun said. "Mid-level. He runs logistics for 3 of their shell companies. We identified him at 4 a.m. from our records." She looked at the timestamp. 11:03 p.m. Last night, while she was still at the gala. "He knew I wouldn't be home," she said. "They knew I was at the gala. They sent someone while I was still there." "They were already moving before I walked through the door," Tae-jun said. "My entrance changed the shape of the operation, but not the fact of it." She stared at the image. The ordinary-looking man with his ordinary-looking posture, walking through a service entrance into the building where she lived, where Harriet lived, where she kept her father's birthday cards in a drawer because she hadn't been able to throw them away. "I want to see the storage unit today," she said. "I know. Before they figure out it exists." "Their search of your apartment was focused on the apartment," Tae-jun said. "If they'd found records of the storage unit, we'd have seen different movement overnight, but that window closes fast." "Then we go now." He nodded once. He turned to Jin-ho and said something. Jin-ho carefully removed Harriet from his lap. The cat made a sound of protest and then jumped to the desk and sat on the keyboard with the decisive indifference of someone making a point and stood up. "3 of us," Tae-jun said. "Low profile, no convoy." He was already looking at her with the assessment of someone doing math. "Do you have other clothes here?" "I have a black dress and the coat I came in." He left the room. He came back in 2 minutes with a folded sweatshirt that was obviously his. Too large, dark navy, no markings. He held it out. She looked at it and then at him. "It'll help you not look like you just left a gala," he said. She took it. It was soft from many washings and smelled like something clean and faintly cedar. She put it on over the dress in the absence of better options, and the sleeves fell past her hands and she rolled them up twice. And he was right. It helped. "Okay," she said. They left. The storage facility in Beacon Hill was the ordinary kind. Orange roll-up doors, fluorescent corridors, the particular smell of contained dust and old paper. Nia had rented the unit 3 years ago when she'd moved into a smaller apartment and needed somewhere to put the furniture she couldn't fit, but wasn't ready to get rid of. Since her father died, she'd added his things to it without ever going back to look at them. The corridor was empty at 6:40 in the morning. Her unit was in the back row. Tae-jun walked beside her. Jin-ho was behind them, and she understood without it being explained that his job was the corridor, not the unit, watching approaches, timing, anything that moved wrong. She worked the combination and lifted the door. The unit was exactly as she'd left it, chaotic in the way of grief storage, things placed without system because system had been impossible at the time. Her mother's boxes in the far corner, her old sofa pushed against the left wall, her father's 2 winter coats hanging from a hook she'd screwed in on her second visit because she'd put them on the floor the first time and then felt bad about it. And in the middle, on top of a filing cabinet, the box from Hargrove and Associates. Brown cardboard. R. Brooks. Personal effects written on the side in someone's administrative handwriting. She went to it. Her hands weren't shaking. She was aware of that. Aware that they should have been, maybe, and weren't. She pulled the tape off. She opened the flaps. Inside, a coffee mug with a chip in the rim that she'd given him for Father's Day when she was 19. A small framed photo of the two of them at her college graduation. A box of his preferred mechanical pencils. A notepad. A reading glasses case. The small daily use things of a careful, ordinary life. And in the corner of the box, an envelope. White. Her name on the front in his handwriting. The handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. Small and precise, always slanting slightly right, the N in her name with the particular serif he'd learned from his mother. Nia. Just that. She held it in both hands. "Take your time," Taijun said, behind her, quietly, not touching her. She opened it. Inside was a birthday card, a simple one, with an illustration on the front that she didn't process. And inside the card, in his handwriting, Bird. If you're reading this under ordinary circumstances, then everything is fine and I'm just being sentimental. If you're reading this because something has happened, then I need you to know that everything I did because I couldn't do anything else. You know how I am. You've always known. The small blue drive is in the hollow compartment beneath the bottom drawer of my study desk. The desk is in the second of your mother's boxes. The password is your mother's birthday backward. 4 digits. I love you more than I know how to say. Finish it. Dad. Nia read it once. She read it again. She folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and held the envelope against her chest for a moment, both arms across it, eyes closed. She did not cry. Not here. Not now. She put the envelope in the pocket of the sweatshirt. His sweatshirt. She was wearing Taejun's sweatshirt. Her father had just told her where to find the evidence that could bring down the people who killed him. And she turned around. "It's here," she said. "He left me the location. It's in one of the boxes." Taejun looked at her for a moment. "Can you find it?" "Yes." She moved to the corner where her mother's boxes sat and checked the labels she'd written on them. Mom, photos. Mom, clothes/linens, and then the third one, unlabeled, the one that had come from her father's house. Dad, study. She opened it. The desk drawer was at the bottom, padded in towels. She lifted it out and set it on the floor and looked at the underside and found, on the third examination, the seam, almost invisible, the line where a false bottom had been fitted with carpenter's precision. Her father, who balanced his checkbook by hand. She pressed the seam in 2 places simultaneously and the panel released. The drive was the size of a thumb, dark blue, labeled with a piece of masking tape on which her father had written one word in his careful handwriting, truth. She held it up. Taejun looked at it, and then at her face, and something moved across his expression that she couldn't entirely name. Relief, maybe, but heavier than that. Like a man who had been carrying something in one hand for a long time and had just found the thing that made the weight make sense. "We need to move," Jinho said from the doorway. His voice had a new quality. "Car in the lot. Plates I don't recognize. Been sitting since we arrived." Taejun was already moving. "Close the unit." Nia put the drive in the pocket with the envelope, closed her father's box, pulled the roll-up door down, and snapped the lock. 30 seconds, total. She was getting better at moving fast. "Back exit?" Taejun said. "North corridor," Jinho said. "I checked on the way in." They moved. She didn't look back at the unit, at the cardboard box with the coffee mug and the graduation photo and the last pieces of her father's ordinary life. She put her hand in her pocket and felt the hard, small shape of the drive and thought, he finished it. He went all the way, and he left me the last mile. She was going to walk it. In the north corridor under the fluorescent lights, moving at a pace that was not quite running, Taejun touched her elbow once. Not grabbing, just contact, directional. And she went where the touch directed her without thinking about it. The way you moved with someone when you'd started, without noticing, to trust the information they gave you through their body. Later she would think about that moment, the unremarkable, automatic trust of it, and understand that something had already shifted between them that neither of them had named. But later. Right now, they came out of the north exit into the cold morning air, and the car was 30 feet away, and she had a dead man's evidence in her pocket, and somewhere behind them, in a nondescript vehicle with plates Jinho didn't recognize, someone was reporting in. And whoever they were reporting to had just learned that Nia Brooks had been at the storage unit at 6:40 in the morning and she hadn't arrived alone. They were back in the penthouse by 7:15. Taejun called a man named Malcolm Reeves. She didn't know the name then. She would. He hung up, turned to her, and said, "Tonight. He can see us tonight. He has something your father left with him separately, something he was told to hold until someone came asking." Nia looked at the drive in her palm, the word truth in her father's small, precise handwriting. "How many pieces did he leave?" she said. "Your father," Taejun said, and there was something in his voice now, something that was very close to admiration, "was the most thorough man I have ever known." She closed her hand around the drive. And somewhere across the city, a phone rang in a house on Capitol Hill where a silver-haired man sat in his study with coffee going cold on the desk, and he listened to the report on the other end for 40 seconds without speaking. And then he said, quietly and without particular inflection, "Bring me the girl. I don't care how." He hung up. He looked out the window at the morning city. His expression was the expression of a man who had already decided that the rules he'd operated under until now, the careful distances, the maintained civility, the mutual deterrence, had just... Charles Caldwell finished his sentence in his study on Capitol Hill at 7:18 in the morning, and the sentence he didn't finish was the one that ended everything that had come before it. The rules were done. Taejun didn't know that yet. He was standing in the kitchen of his penthouse watching Nia turn the blue drive over in her hands, small and precise, her father's word on it in masking tape, and running the timeline in his head, calculating how much the gray sedan had seen, how much the storage unit surveillance had captured, how fast the Caldwells could mobilize from a standing assessment to an active operation. 48 hours, he'd told her last night. He was revising that number downward. "You're thinking," Nia said, without looking up from the drive. "Always. You're thinking something different than you were 10 minutes ago." He looked at her. She was still in his sweatshirt, her hair pulled back roughly, sitting at the kitchen island with the drive and the envelope in front of her like a man's entire life, reduced to two objects, which was more or less what it was. She hadn't cried. He kept noticing that, not with judgment, just with the recognition of someone who understood what it cost. "The car at the storage unit changes the window," he said. "We have less time than I told you." She absorbed this without visible reaction. How much less? "Malcolm Reeves. Tonight is still possible, but we move carefully, and we move now." "Tell me about Reeves." "Attorney. Independent. Not connected to any firm the Caldwells have reach into. Your father used him for a specific purpose. Document custody. Malcolm holds things for people who need them held outside conventional channels, and he doesn't ask questions, and he has spent 20 years building a reputation that makes him difficult to threaten." "Difficult," she said. "Not impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Taejun said. "But Malcolm Reeves has his own insurance. People who hold things for people in dangerous situations tend to be very good at making sure that something terrible happens to someone specific if anything terrible happens to them first." Nia looked at him. "That's a very organized world you live in." "It's a very organized world everyone lives in," he said. "Most people just don't see the organization." She picked up the drive again. She turned it once in her fingers and set it down. "My father built this in pieces," she said. "The drive, the letter, whatever he left with Reeves. He built it so that no single piece was enough on its own and no single person had all of it. Yes. He was protecting each person individually. If anyone was found, they'd only have part of it. He understood the structure of the thing he was fighting," Taejun said. "He was a careful man." Something moved across her face at that. There and gone. A grief that she was managing with the kind of discipline that hurt to watch, because you could see the effort of it. "He was the most careful man I ever knew," she said, "and they still got to him." Taejun didn't answer. There was no answer to that, and she wasn't asking for one. "Tonight," she said. "What do we need before tonight?" He told her. Malcolm Reeves operated from a narrow brownstone office in First Hill, the kind of building that was unremarkable by design. No signage, a buzzer entry system, a receptionist who had been with him for 15 years, and who greeted Taejun by name without warmth or coldness, just the professional neutrality of someone who had seen everything and categorized it. They arrived at 8:40 p.m. Jinho stayed with the car. The building had 3 floors, and Reeves used all of them. The ground floor was ordinary office space, conference table, bookshelves, the deliberate normality of a man who wanted his professional life to look like what it said on the door. He met them in the conference room on the second floor, which was where the work actually happened. More books, 2 safes visible and certainly more that weren't, a desk with the particular ordered complexity of someone managing multiple, simultaneous critical situations. Malcolm Reeves was 61 and built like a man who had once been athletic and had replaced the athleticism with stillness, compact, precise in his movements, with eyes that assessed and filed in a single pass. He shook Tae-jun's hand. He turned to Nia and looked at her for a moment before he offered his hand, and when he took hers, he held it a beat longer than a handshake required. "You have your father's eyes," he said. "He talked about you constantly." Nia held it together. "He was like that," she said. Reeves gestured to the chairs. They sat. He poured water without asking and set it in front of both of them, and then sat down himself and folded his hands on the desk. "He came to me 14 months ago," Reeves said. "He was—" A pause, choosing. "He was not afraid. I want you to know that. He was angry, and he was determined, and he had done the math on what he was walking into. He was not a man who'd made peace with dying. He was a man who'd made a decision that he understood the cost of." Nia nodded once. "He left 2 things with me," Reeves said, "a sealed package and instructions for when to release it." He looked at Nia steadily. The instructions were specific. If Raymond Brooks died under circumstances that were not natural, the package was to remain sealed until someone came asking who could verify 2 things: the password he gave me and the presence of a blue drive. Nia put the drive on the desk. Reeves looked at it. He looked at her. "The password," he said. She said her mother's birthday backward. 4 digits, the way her father had written it. Reeves opened the left drawer of his desk and removed a sealed envelope, legal-sized, and placed it on the table between them. "The package contains 2 things," he said. "A notarized statement from your father describing in full what he found, how he found it, and the complete chain of custody for the documentation on the drive. And a second document, a letter of instructions addressed to whoever came for this, with specific guidance on how to deploy the evidence in a way that cannot be suppressed." He looked at Tae-jun. "He wrote those instructions for you specifically," Reeves said. "He was very clear about that. He said—" He paused, and something briefly human crossed his face. "He said you were the only person he trusted to understand what these materials needed to destroy and to make sure they destroyed it." Tae-jun was very still. "He also said," Reeves continued, "that you would probably feel responsible for his death." He held Tae-jun's gaze without flinching. "He said to tell you that you were wrong. He said the decision was his and the outcome was his, and the only thing he wanted from you was to finish what he left unfinished." The room was silent. Nia looked at her hands on the table. Tae-jun looked at the envelope. Then Reeves's phone rang, his desk phone, the landline, and he glanced at the display and his expression changed in a specific way. Not fear, but the alertness of a man who had just recognized a variable. He answered it. He listened for 8 seconds. He said, "Understood." He hung up. He looked at them both. "My building security," he said. "There's a vehicle on the street, 2 men on the sidewalk. They've been there since approximately 8:20. Tae-jun was already standing. Before you arrived. The number Tae-jun had been revising downward in his head hit 0. "Take the package," he said to Nia. To Reeves, "Is there a second exit?" "3rd floor, roof access to the adjacent building," Reeves said. He was moving already, professional and calm. "I've used it before." "Go," Tae-jun said to Nia. She took the envelope. She looked at him with a question. "I'm behind you," he said. "Go." They went up.
The
roof was cold, and the Seattle night was its particular wet gray, the skyline throwing soft orange into the low clouds. Nia crossed to the adjacent building with Reeves leading the way. A 2-foot gap, a low wall, nothing she couldn't clear. Tae-jun was behind her, and she didn't look back because looking back slowed you down, and she was getting very good at not looking back. Reeves took them down through a residential building. He had a key fob for the service entrance, which told her things about how well he'd maintained his infrastructure over 20 years, and they came out on the parallel street. Jinho had the car there in 4 minutes. She didn't ask how he knew where to be. She was beginning to understand that Jinho simply always knew where to be. In the car, moving, Tae-jun opened the envelope. He read the documents for 6 minutes in silence. Nia watched him read, watched the controlled economy of his expression, the small things that moved through it that he probably didn't know were visible. A tightening once, a held breath released, and near the end something that was either fury or grief, and was possibly both. He lowered the pages. "Your father was thorough," he said, and it came out different than when he'd said it before. Heavier, inhabited. "What does it say?" He looked at her for a moment. "The documents on the drive are complete. Financial records, account numbers, transaction histories, recorded conversations, everything needed for a federal prosecution." A pause. "But there's something else." She waited. "The letter of instructions names a contact," he said. "Someone inside the federal system who your father identified as clean. Someone who isn't inside the Caldwell network. Someone who, if approached correctly with the complete package, can move it through channels that can't be blocked." "Who is it?" "An FBI financial crimes agent named Dana Mercer. She's been building a parallel case against the Caldwell organization for 3 years from the outside, without the full picture, without the evidence to push it past the suppression they have in place. With what's on this drive," he set the papers down. "It's enough. It's more than enough." Nia processed that. "So we have everything we need." "We have everything we need," he agreed. "Then what's the problem?" He was quiet for precisely 2 seconds longer than necessary. "The letter," he said, "also contains something your father discovered in the last weeks of his life. Something he hadn't told me." She looked at him. "The account that first flagged his attention," Tae-jun said, "the subsidiary discrepancy that started all of this. When he went back and traced the full chain of it, he found that it ran not just through the Caldwell organization, but through a routing structure that connected to a second entity." He held her gaze with the specific care of someone delivering something they wished they didn't have to deliver. "A Korean-owned holding company registered in Vancouver. One of mine." The car moved through the wet city night. Nia said nothing. "It was used without my knowledge," he said. "Someone inside my organization provided access to the routing infrastructure, used the shell architecture I built for my own operations as a laundering conduit for the Caldwells. Your father identified it. He documented it. He did not tell me because he didn't know." Another pause. "He didn't know whether I knew. He documented it as a contingency, in case I was complicit. Were you?" The question came out flat and direct, and she was not sorry for it. "No?" "That's what someone who was would say." "Yes," he said. "I know." She looked out the window. The city, the wet streets. She thought about her father sitting in Malcolm Reeves' conference room 14 months ago, building his documentation with the meticulous precision of a man who trusted the math and not the people. And she thought about what it had cost him to look at the evidence and understand that the man he'd gone to for protection might also be part of what he was fighting. "He trusted you anyway," she said. "He didn't know," Tae-jun said. "He documented it as a contingency, but he still left the instructions in my name." "He knew," she said. "My father always knew. He documented the contingency because he was thorough, but he knew." She looked at Tae-jun. "Which means someone in your organization sold you to the Caldwells. Which means someone inside your protection is working against us right now." The car went quiet in a new way. Tae-jun reached forward and said 2 words to Jinho in Korean. Jinho's hands tightened on the wheel in a movement so small she almost didn't see it. "How many people knew we were going to Reeves tonight?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. "How many?" "4, he said. "Jinho, my operations director, Park Soo-han, my head of security, Lee Dong-wook, and a 4th member of my core team." He said the last part with a specific restraint that meant something. "You already know," she said. "You already have a guess." "I have a pattern," he said. "I didn't want to see it as a pattern until now." "What's the pattern?" He was quiet for a moment that felt like the moment before a building structure decides which way it's going to fall. "The gray sedan last night, the car at the storage unit this morning. Both times we made our decisions inside the penthouse with those 4 people in proximity." He looked at her. "Reeves tonight, we told all 4. Jinho said something. Short, flat. What did he say? Nia said. He said he'll drive, Taejun said, which meant Jinho was ruling himself out, which meant he already knew who it was, too. She held the envelope in her lap, and the drive was in her pocket, and somewhere behind them a car had been waiting on a street before they'd even arrived, and somewhere in the Caldwell operation, someone had known their destination in advance, and somewhere in Taejun's inner circle, a person had made a decision that had been feeding information outward for months. 4 days, he'd told her. He'd missed it by 4 days. And now she understood that missing it had not been bad luck.
Okay.
They went back to the penthouse by a route Jinho chose without explanation, doubling back twice. She didn't ask. The envelope stayed in her hands and she kept pressure on it, not consciously, just the physical need to hold the thing her father had died for. In the elevator, Taejun stood beside her and she could feel the specific quality of his stillness. Not the composed stillness of a man in control, but the compressed stillness of a man who was containing something that would otherwise have a shape she didn't want to see in a small space. The elevator opened. Park Soo-han was in the main room. He was 44, lean, with the particular physical efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years in organizational work that occasionally required more than organizational skills. He'd been with Taejun for 11 years. He was the operations director. He knew every system, every protocol, every access point. He looked at them both when they came in. His gaze moved to the envelope in Nia's hands and stayed there for exactly 1 second too long. Taejun walked past him without stopping. "My office," he said. It was not a question. Park followed. Nia stood in the main room with Jinho beside her, and through the closed office door she heard voices, Korean, low, and then not low, and then a silence that was worse than the not low. And she stood there with her father's evidence in her hands and felt the shape of the thing they were inside become fully visible for the first time. The office door opened. Park Soo-han came out first. He was not moving like a man who had been confronted. He was moving like a man who had calculated something and arrived at a conclusion. He looked at Nia with an expression she didn't fully understand until he reached into his jacket. Jinho moved before she processed what was happening. A body between her and Park, fast and without ceremony, one hand going to Park's wrist and twisting in a specific way that made Park's arm immobilize without breaking, a cold economy of motion that ended with Park's back against the wall and his right hand empty. The gun was on the floor. Taejun came out of the office. He looked at Park against the wall with Jinho's hand at his throat. He looked at the gun on the floor. He looked at Nia. She was still holding the envelope. Her heart was going very fast, a physical fact she could feel in her palms and her throat, but her hands were steady, and she was still standing exactly where she'd been standing. "How long?" Taejun said to Park. Park said nothing. "How long?" It wasn't louder. It was flatter. The flatness was worse. 14 months, Park said. The number landed in the room. 14 months. Before her father had died. Before Raymond Brooks had walked into a parking garage. "They came to me before you knew about Brooks," Park said. He said it with the calm of a man who had already done the math on consequences and decided something. "They knew you were sheltering him. They wanted information on your security protocols. I said no. Then they—" A pause. "They had something. Something I couldn't— It wasn't a choice I had." "What did they have?" Taejun said. Park looked at him with something that was not entirely without pain. "My brother," he said. "In Busan. He owes money to people who work adjacent to the Caldwell network. They said—" "You gave them the routing access," Taejun said. Not a question. Park's jaw worked. "I gave them the Vancouver structure, nothing operational, nothing that touched your people directly. You gave them the structure Raymond Brooks traced back to me," Taejun said, "which he documented, which nearly made him believe I was complicit, which is the one piece of this that could still be used to discredit everything we're about to do." His voice had not changed in volume or pace. It was perfectly, terribly even. "And you gave them our location tonight." "I didn't know about Reeves." "You told them we were going to First Hill at 8:40 p.m. You didn't need to know the name." Taejun looked at him for a long moment. "They were waiting before we arrived. If Reeves' security hadn't—" He stopped. He looked away from Park. He looked at the wall and then at nothing, and in that moment she saw something that was more frightening than anger. The specific, contained quality of a man processing a betrayal that went down further than he'd let himself believe possible. Park said, I didn't know about Brooks. I didn't know what they'd do to him. You knew enough, Taejun said. The room held that. What do we do with him? Jinho said. Flat, practical. Already past the grief of it. Taejun looked at Park. You're going to fix the one thing you broke, Hwa, he said. The Vancouver routing documentation. You're going to write a notarized statement describing exactly how the Caldwells accessed it, without your knowledge, by compromising a mid-level administrator you've since identified. He paused. It will be a lie. The lie will seal the record. The lie will cost you nothing except whatever you think you owe me, which is... He stopped. He turned away. Jinho will take you. You won't be harmed. You'll write what you're told, and then you'll leave Seattle, and you'll take care of your brother, and you'll never contact me again. Park stared at him. That's it? Park said. What did you expect? I expected... Park stopped. His throat moved. I expected you to... I know what you expected, Taejun said. I'm not going to do it. Not because I'm not angry. Because your brother is innocent and killing you solves nothing, and your signed statement is worth more to me than whatever it would cost you. He moved to the window. Go, now, before I change the math. Jinho took Park out. The room went quiet in a way that had texture, the specific acoustic quality of a space from which something that had been present for a long time had just been removed. Nia stood in it. She looked at Taejun's back at the window. His hands were at his sides, very still. He was with you for 11 years, she said. Yes. I'm sorry. He turned from the window. He looked at her across the room with an expression that was stripped of everything he usually managed it into. No composure, no calculation, no careful construction. Just a man standing in the aftermath of something that had taken 11 years to fall. The Caldwells will know their surveillance is broken, he said. Park will report that he's been burned. Charles will know he's lost his inside access. He came back into the room, and the composure was returning. She watched it happen, watched him pick it back up piece by piece, which was almost harder to watch than the moment without it. He'll move to direct action. How direct? He said, bring me the girl, Taejun said. That was this morning. Now he's lost his inside man and his surveillance, and he knows we have the drive. He looked at her with the clarity of someone who had stopped protecting her from the shape of things. He's going to come for you personally, not his people. Him. She thought about Charles Caldwell looking through her at a party 4 years ago, his polite nothing questions about her father. She thought about a parking garage. She thought about the drive in her pocket with her father's handwriting on the masking tape. Good, she said. Taejun looked at her. He wants to come for me personally, she said. Let him come for me personally. But we get the evidence to Dana Mercer first. Tonight if we can. Mercer is in Portland. She can be here by morning if... Call her, Nia said. Right now. Call her and tell her we have everything she needs and she has one window to get here before Charles Caldwell decides that burning everything down is worth what it costs. He looked at her for a moment, and she understood that he was seeing something in her that hadn't been there 48 hours ago, or had been there and been buried under 6 months of careful, quiet grief, and was now neither careful nor quiet. There's a dinner, he said. Charles Caldwell hosts it annually. His home on Capitol Hill. It's in 3 days. He will expect us to be there. He'll want to see us, assess us, watch the pressure up close. He held her gaze. If we go, we walk into his space with the evidence already deployed, with Mercer already moving, and we sit across from the man who killed your father and we let him understand without saying it that it's already over. She thought about that, the dinner table. Charles Caldwell's careful eyes. Ethan across the room watching them. He'll try to do something at the dinner, she said. He'll try. So will we. Taejun was quiet for a beat. You understand what you're agreeing to, he said. If we walk into that house... My father walked into that parking garage, she said. I know what I'm agreeing to. Something crossed his face. He held her gaze for a moment that was longer than the conversation required, and in it she felt the weight of everything that had accumulated between them in 48 hours. The kiss that had been a calculation, and the coffee at midnight, and the sweatshirt in the storage unit and Park against the wall, in 11 years. all of it compressing into the particular density of two people who had stopped pretending the thing between them was only professional. Neither of them named it. Not yet. "I'll call Mercer," he said. "I'll start on the briefing package," she said. "I was my father's daughter. I know how to build a document." He almost smiled. Not quite. Almost. He reached for his phone, and from somewhere in the city, from a study on Capitol Hill where a silver-haired man sat with cold coffee and a phone that had just delivered bad news about a burned inside man, a different kind of preparation. Dana Mercer arrived at the penthouse at 6:40 a.m. with a carry-on bag and the particular alertness of someone who had driven 4 hours in the dark on 2 hours of sleep and was running on the specific fuel of someone who had been waiting 3 years for a phone call like the one she'd received at 2 in the morning. She was 43, compact, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and eyes that moved through a room the way Tae-jun's did, cataloging, filing, never entirely stopping. She shook Tae-jun's hand. She looked at Nia. "You're Raymond's daughter," she said. "Yes." Mercer looked at her for a moment with something that was not pity and not sympathy, but something more useful than either. Recognition. The recognition of someone who understood exactly what it cost to be standing in this room. "He told me about you," she said, "when he called me 11 months ago. He said—" She stopped, something moving briefly across her face. "He said his daughter was the toughest person he knew, and she didn't know it yet." Nia held that. She put it somewhere she could find it later. "Show me what you have," Mercer said. They showed her. It took 2 hours. Mercer went through the drive documentation with the focused intensity of a woman who had been building a case from the outside and was now seeing, for the first time, the complete architecture of what she'd only had pieces of. She didn't exclaim. She didn't editorialize. She made notes in a small, precise handwriting and occasionally asked a specific question and then went back to reading. Tae-jun sat across from her. Nia sat beside Mercer and answered the questions about her father's methodology, the way he'd organized the documentation, the sequencing of the evidence chain, the notation system he'd used in the financial records that would need explanation for a legal submission. At 8:15, Mercer put down her pen. "This is enough," she said. 3 words. The specific weight of 3 words that had taken a man's life to earn. "Timeline," Tae-jun said. "I can have an emergency submission to my supervising AUSA in Portland by end of business today. With this package," she touched the drive, "we can have a sealed grand jury referral within 48 hours. The key is moving before the Caldwells understand what's in motion." She looked at Tae-jun. "And before they can use their contacts to redirect the submission." "There's a dinner," Nia said. "Tomorrow night, Charles Caldwell's house. We've been invited." Mercer looked at her. "You're going?" "We're going." A pause. "That's a risk." "It's also a window," Tae-jun said. "If Charles believes we're at his table, he's not running. He won't understand the full picture until it's already moving." Mercer was quiet for a moment, calculating. "I need 24 hours, she said. "If you can give me 24 hours before he knows, I can have the submission sealed and the referral active. Once it's active, his contacts can't kill it without creating their own exposure." "You have 24 hours, Tae-jun said. Mercer looked at Nia. "You understand what happens at that dinner if something goes wrong?" "Yes," Nia said. "Raymond would—" "I know what my father would say," Nia said. "He'd say don't go. He'd say the evidence is enough. Get out. Let the system work." She held Mercer's gaze. "But he also walked into that parking garage instead of stopping, so I know what he'd actually do." Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the drive and her notes and stood. "Don't be late to your own operation," she said, and left. The next 22 hours had a specific quality, the quality of a held breath. The held breath of a body of water before a storm makes contact. Tae-jun moved through it with the deliberate efficiency of someone running parallel tracks. The operational preparation for the dinner, the management of communication from Mercer as she worked through the submission process, the constant recalculation of the intelligence landscape now that Park was gone, and the information architecture had to be rebuilt from scratch. Nia moved through it differently. She built the briefing document her father would have built, organized, precise, cross-referenced. She worked at the kitchen island while Tae-jun worked at his desk, and they spoke when they needed to and were quiet when they didn't. And the quiet was not empty. It had accumulated. It had weight. At 10 p.m., she looked up from the screen and found him watching her from the doorway of his office. "You should sleep," he said. "You should stop telling me to sleep. You said that last time, and I was right last time." She pushed her laptop aside. "Come sit down." He came and sat across from her at the island. He had loosened his collar, and his sleeves were rolled. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, which was 3 days, which felt impossible, tired. Not weak, just inhabited by the weight of things, the way people looked when they stopped performing fine. "Tell me something real," she said. He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been managing me, and managing the situation, and managing everything for 72 hours, and I want to hear you say one thing that isn't strategy." A beat. He looked at his hands. "I almost didn't go into that ballroom," he said. "I had a protocol. Approach you privately, explain, give you the choice. Walking in like that..." He paused. "That was not the protocol. When I came through those doors and I saw where you were standing and the expression on your face, He stopped. "I made a decision that was not strategic." She looked at him. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because he was still talking," he said, "and you were still standing there taking it, and I..." Another stop. "Your father described you to me 11 months ago. He said you were the kind of person who stood when standing cost something. He said it like it was the most important thing about you." He held her gaze with the particular directness that was simply how he inhabited things. He was right. The kitchen was very quiet. "He would have liked you," Nia said, which would have annoyed him because he would have liked you. And he also would have been very conflicted about that. Something moved across Tae-jun's face that was definitively a smile. Brief and real. And the first one she'd seen that wasn't almost. It changed his face entirely, and she thought about what it cost him to hold it back as often as he did. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is going to require everything." This time she went. The Caldwell House on Capitol Hill was a 1920s Georgian colonial that had been renovated by 3 generations of careful money. The kind of house that communicated wealth through restraint, through the specific quality of surfaces that cost so much they didn't need to announce it. The circular drive was lit with warm lamps. The front door opened before they reached it. Tae-jun had chosen black. She had chosen deep burgundy, a dress she'd asked Jin-ho to retrieve from her apartment along with Harriet and her medication, one of those acquisitions that had happened practically and without comment, like so many things in the past 3 days. He had brought her the dress, her good heels, and a small box of her father's things from her bedside table without being asked to bring the last thing, which she didn't mention. She wore her father's watch. It ran a little fast. She'd always meant to get it fixed. They arrived at 7:50 p.m. Tae-jun's hand found the small of her back as they walked to the door. Not possessive, grounding. She felt his warmth through the fabric, and she did not move away from it. Mercer had texted at 6 p.m. Submission sealed. Referral active as of 5:47. You have a window. She had not told Tae-jun until they were in the car, pulling away from the penthouse. He'd read the message, and then put the phone away and looked out the window for a moment, and she'd watched his jaw work once, and then he'd said, "Your father finished it." "We finished it," she said. He'd looked at her. He'd said nothing else. But his hand, resting on the seat between them, had turned palm up, and she'd placed her hand in it, and they'd ridden the rest of the way to Capitol Hill like that, in the dark, without naming what they were doing. Charles Caldwell was waiting for them. That was the first thing she understood when they came through the door. He was not mingling, was not in the middle of the room doing the hosting performance. He was positioned, 15 feet from the entrance, with 2 men flanking him at a distance that was just casual enough to be deliberate, a glass of something amber in his hand. He was 67, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in the gray suit of a man who had decided decades ago that elegance was a form of control. His face was structured and still, with eyes that were the eyes of someone who had looked at the world for 67 years as a series of problems to be managed. He looked at them. Taejun, he said. Warm, weightless, the warmth of a man who had learned to perform it perfectly. I'm glad you came. Charles, Taejun said. Caldwell's eyes moved to Nia. They moved across her with the specific, unhurried quality of an assessment, not attraction, not the social scan of a host reading a guest, but the measuring look of a man deciding something about the value of a variable. And this must be your wife, he said. His voice gave the word nothing. No irony, no emphasis. Just the word, clean and positioned like a chess piece. Nia, she said. She offered her hand. He took it. His hand was dry and cool, and his grip was calibrated, firm enough to communicate, not enough to threaten. She smiled. She had spent 6 years managing 22 5-year-olds simultaneously. She could maintain a surface indefinitely. Raymond's daughter, he said. She kept the smile. That's right. Something moved behind his eyes. He was a good man, Charles said. A careful man. It was a terrible loss. It was, she said. He held her gaze for one beat past comfortable and then released it with the smooth ease of a man who did this professionally. Come, he said, gesturing toward the room. There are people who want to meet you. The dinner was 14 people at a long table in a formal dining room. A controlled gathering, everyone selected, everyone positioned. Nia cataloged them as she sat. 2 men she recognized from Seattle business coverage, a city council member, a woman who was either an attorney or wanted to appear to be, and Ethan. Ethan was at the far end. She'd been placed at the middle. He'd seen her the moment she came in and hadn't looked away since, with the expression of a man running a calculation he didn't like the answer to. She didn't look at him. She looked at the table, the flowers, the crystal, the careful normality of an expensive dinner in a house where everything was performance and nothing was what it appeared. Her father's watch ran a little fast against her wrist. Taejun sat beside her. Under the table, his hand found her knee once. Not romantic, tactical. A communication. I'm here. Hold. She put her hand over his briefly, and then withdrew it, and they were a married couple in the easy, unremarkable way of people who had learned each other's physical language, and every person at that table believed it completely because it was not a lie. The dinner moved through its courses. Charles talked. He was exceptional at talking. The kind of conversation that felt generous and revealing and gave away nothing. He asked Taejun about his recent business movements. He asked Nia about teaching with a warmth that was indistinguishable from genuine interest. He made a subtle, glancing reference to the engagement party, what a remarkable entrance you two made, and laughed easily at it, and the table laughed with him. And Taejun smiled in a way that told her exactly nothing. She ate. She drank sparingly. She watched Charles Caldwell the way she'd watched her students for 6 years. The micro-expressions, the timing of glances, the small physical tells of a person managing something they didn't want visible. He didn't know yet. She could see it. He was watching them, probing, trying to understand the scope of what he was dealing with. He was looking for the edges of the thing to assess whether it could still be contained. He wasn't panicking. He was still in control mode, still operating on the assumption that the situation could be managed. He didn't know that at 5:47 p.m. that day, the floor had been taken out from under it. Dessert arrived. The table had relaxed into the end-of-dinner ease of people who'd been fed and wined and managed into pleasant agreement. Charles leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man on his own territory. I wonder, he said conversationally, looking at Taejun with the warm eyes of a predator in excellent lighting, if after dinner you and I might have a brief word privately. A pause, microscopic. About Raymond Brooks. The table continued around them. Nobody else had registered the shift. Taejun looked at Charles with complete calm. Of course, he said. Under the table, his hand found her knee again, 2 fingers, pressing once. Stay ready. She pressed back. I know. Babette. The study was at the back of the house, off a hallway lined with framed photographs of 3 generations of Caldwell men doing the things Caldwell men did. Shaking hands with city officials, cutting ribbons, standing in front of buildings that bore their name. She clocked all of it in the 15 seconds it took to walk the hallway, and understood it as what it was, a narrative, a constructed history. the image of a family who had built Seattle with clean hands. Her father's watch ticked a little fast. Charles closed the study door. The room was all dark wood and contained light and the particular stillness of a space that had absorbed a lot of consequential conversation over the years. He moved to his desk, not sitting behind it, which would have been a power statement too obvious for a man this controlled, standing beside it, which was more complex, which allowed him to be in the room with them rather than across from them. A man at his desk was an adversary. A man beside his desk was still your host. "I want to speak plainly," Charles said. "Please," Taejun said. "I've known about Raymond Brooks' investigation for over a year," Charles said. His voice was even, confessional in the specific way of people who reveal things they're certain you already know to preempt the advantage of your knowing it. "I won't pretend otherwise. I imagine you've had access to documentation that makes that clear." He looked at Taejun. "What I want you to understand is that I have spent that year operating with considerable restraint." "Restraint," Taejun said. "I could have moved against you directly at any number of points. I chose not to. I've had access through various channels to information about your operations that I chose not to use. I maintained the distances. I understood the mutual deterrence." He turned his glass in his hand once. "I'm still offering that." "What are you offering, specifically?" Taejun said. "The drive and its contents. Whatever Brooks left with his attorney. Everything you're—" He glanced at Naya with those measuring eyes. "Your wife retrieved from storage. All of it. In exchange for which I offer the same. A complete cessation of any action against either of you, financial compensation for the disruption, and my word that Raymond Brooks' investigation ends with his death." He said Raymond Brooks' investigation ends with his death like it was a clause in a contract. Clean and businesslike. Like her father was a variable that had been resolved. She felt something happen in her chest that was not grief and not anger, but something older and colder than either. The thing that lived beneath both of them, and had been there since the medical examiner's report that said cardiac arrest, and her body had known, even then, that the word was wrong. "His word," she said. Charles looked at her. She held his gaze. "His word," she repeated. "You want us to accept your word?" "I am a man who has operated in this city for 30 years on my word," Charles said. A slight edge now. A hairline fracture in the control. "My word means something." "Your word means something," Nia said. "That's interesting." She kept her voice level. She kept her hands still. "My father's name was Raymond Elias Brooks, and he was 58 years old, and he balanced his checkbook by hand, and he made my birthday cake from scratch every single year for 32 years, and he died in a parking garage because he found numbers that told the truth about what you did, and now you want me to accept your word." Charles Caldwell looked at her with those still, measured eyes. "You're not wrong," he said, and the ease of it, the complete absence of shame, was the most frightening thing she had heard in 4 days. What was done was necessary. It was not personal. "It was my father," she said. "Everything about it was personal." The room held. Charles set his glass down on the desk. He straightened. Something shifted in his posture. The hosting performance dropped, just slightly, and what was underneath was not emotional, not engaged, not human, in the way that humans were when they were in conflict. It was operational. He moved to the other side of the desk and pressed an intercom button and said 3 words she didn't understand. The study door opened. 2 men came in. Not the flanking men from earlier. Different men, harder men, men whose job was not the appearance of normalcy. "I think," Charles said, with the voice of a man who had just stopped negotiating and started executing, "that we should locate the drive." Taedon stepped between Nia and the 2 men in a single motion that was so immediate and so completely without hesitation that she understood he had been positioned for it since the moment they'd walked into the study. Not in front of the desk, not beside her, but exactly where he was standing, in exactly the gap that needed to be filled. "Charles," he said. His voice had changed, not louder, not angrier, just stripped of the dinner table layer down to what was underneath. And what was underneath was the thing that had made Marcus Chen's face change in a ballroom 3 nights ago, the thing that had stopped a room of 300 people cold when he walked through a door, the thing that was real. "Move against her," Taejun said. "And by morning, there is no Caldwell organization. There are no shell companies. There is no real estate portfolio. There are no contacts in any system that can help you. I will burn everything you have built down to the concrete, and I will do it before you can make a single call. He said it with the absolute unperformed quiet of someone stating a mathematical fact. You know I can. Charles looked at him. The two men looked at Charles. In the silence, Nia's phone buzzed in her clutch. She looked at it. A text from Mercer. It's moving. Grand jury referral transmitted to SDWA 8:41 p.m. Sealed indictments by tomorrow morning. She looked up. Charles, she said. He looked at her. It's already done, she said. She held the phone out so he could see the screen. She watched his eyes move across it, watched them process it, watched something she had never seen in his face across the entire evening appear for the first time. The specific, arriving understanding of a man who has just realized that he is not holding the cards he believed he was holding. That was submitted, he started. Yesterday, she said, before we sat down to dinner. Before you offered us your word. She lowered the phone. My father finished it. He finished it before he died, and he built it so carefully that not one piece of it could be suppressed without creating more exposure than the original. You sent someone into his parking garage, and you thought you ended it. You ended him. You didn't end it. Charles Caldwell stood behind his desk in the study of a house that bore his family's history, and looked at the daughter of the man he'd ordered killed, and he said nothing, because there was nothing that was not already over. And then the sound came from the front of the house, a sound she recognized from police procedurals and from the terrifying reality of it being real. Multiple vehicles, fast, the specific controlled urgency of a coordinated approach. Lights through the study window that were not the warm amber of the driveway lamps. Charles looked toward the window. Ethan's voice came from somewhere in the house. Dad. And Charles Caldwell did something she had not predicted and Tae-Jun had not predicted, and nobody in the room had time to predict. He reached not for the intercom, not for his phone, not for the two men still standing by the door. He reached into the desk drawer. He came up with a gun. Not at Tae-Jun, at her. The drive, he said. His voice was completely, terrifyingly flat. Give me the drive. The submission is already... I don't care about the submission, Charles said. Give me the drive. Without the original documentation, the chain of custody argument collapses. You know it does. His eyes were steady, the eyes of a man who had spent 67 years solving problems and had arrived at the last tool available to him and was using it without hesitation. Give it to me, and I walk out of this house tonight, and I spend whatever time I have left making sure you never... Tae-Jun moved. She would replay it many times and never be able to fully reconstruct the sequence. The way he closed the distance between himself and Charles. The physics of it. The utter absence of theatrical violence in it. One motion. His hand on Charles's wrist. A specific torque. The gun turning. And then the gun was in Tae-Jun's hand, and Charles Caldwell's arm was bent behind him. And Tae-Jun's other hand was at the back of his collar, and Charles was against the desk, and the gun was pointed at the wall, and Tae-Jun was breathing hard. The first time she'd seen him breathing hard, his jaw set, his knuckles white on the weapon. Don't, he said. Just that. Charles Caldwell, 67 years of control and construction and 30 years of built power, stopped moving. The front door opened. Voices came down the hallway, multiple, authoritative, with the specific cadence of people who had training and warrants and the full weight of a sealed federal indictment behind them. Nia stood in the middle of the study in her burgundy dress with her father's watch running a little fast on her wrist and felt the room restructure itself around the truth that had just become irreversible. It was done. Almost. The study door opened. Two agents, Mercer behind them, her eyes finding Nia across the room with the expression of someone arriving at the end of something 3 years in the making. She looked at Charles Caldwell, bent over his own desk, with Tae-Jun's hand at his collar. She looked at the gun in Tae-Jun's other hand. I'll take that, she said to Tae-Jun. He looked at her. He looked at Nia. He held the gun out to Mercer, grip first. Mercer passed it to the agent beside her and produced a document from her jacket and held it out toward Charles Caldwell, who had straightened now, and who was looking at it with the expression of a man seeing the exact shape of the thing that ends him. Charles Caldwell, Mercer said, you are under federal indictment for wire fraud, financial conspiracy, money laundering across 12 years and $437 million in documented transactions, and the first-degree murder of Raymond Elias Brooks. She said her father's full name. clean and complete and without softness, because it required neither. You have the right to remain silent. Ethan Caldwell appeared in the doorway. He looked at his father in the hands of 2 federal agents. He looked at the room, the agents, Mercer, Taijun, and then Naya, who was standing in the middle of it all with the watch on her wrist and the evidence already transmitted and everything her father had built now standing upright in the world, real and irrefutable. Ethan looked at her, and she looked back at him, at the man who had stood at a microphone 3 days ago and told a room full of people she had a small life, who had looked through her for 4 years with the confidence of someone who had already filed her under not worth it. And she did not feel the old ache, the ghost reflex, the thing that had tightened her shoulders when she'd heard his laugh across a ballroom. She felt nothing about him at all, which was, she understood, its own kind of freedom. Nia, Taijun said, beside her now. His hand found the small of her back, the same place it had been when they walked to the door 2 hours ago, the same warmth through the same fabric. But different now, everything the same and completely different. I know, she said. I know, she said again. Charles Caldwell was led out of his own study by 2 federal agents. Ethan stepped out of the doorway to let them pass and then stood in the hall, diminished, in the specific way of men who have only ever known themselves in the context of their Ethan Caldwell stood in the hallway of his father's house and diminished. That was the only word for it, not collapsed, not broke, not fell apart in any visible dramatic way. He simply became smaller in the space he occupied, the way a fire becomes smaller when you take away what it was burning until what's left is just the shape of something that used to have heat. Nia watched it happen from the doorway of the study. The federal agents moved past him with his father between them, and Charles Caldwell did not look at his son as he passed, which told her more about the architecture of that family than anything she'd witnessed at any dinner table. Charles looked straight ahead with the specific, sealed composure of a man who had decided that whatever came next, he would not perform collapse for an audience. He had been a controlled man his entire life. He was going to be a controlled man now. Ethan looked at his father's back until it disappeared around the corner of the hallway. Then he looked at Nia. She had expected to feel something at this moment. She'd run through it in the back of her mind during the hours of the past 3 days when she wasn't running through evidence and logistics and the shape of what was coming. She'd thought about this specific moment, Ethan's face when it was over, and she'd expected the satisfaction of it, or the sadness, or the complicated residue of 4 years that had turned out to be something other than what she'd believed them to be. What she felt instead was very quiet, not cold, not numb, just quiet. The particular quiet of a thing that has been resolved. Nia, Ethan said. His voice had something in it she had never heard from him before, which was the sound of a man without performance, without the ease, without the calculated delivery, without the room management. Just a voice. I didn't know about your father. She looked at him. I need you to know that, he said. I knew there were things. I knew not to ask. But I didn't know about Raymond. His jaw worked. I swear to you I didn't know. She thought about her father's documentation, the careful, comprehensive record of everything Raymond Brooks had found and traced and built. She thought about what Taijun had said, whether your relationship was entirely engineered, and the way he'd said it, the care he'd taken not to confirm what he believed. I believe you, she said. Something moved across Ethan's face that might have been relief and might have been the beginning of something worse than relief. The specific grief of a man who has just understood that being believed doesn't change what happened. That innocence of the specific crime doesn't absolve you of the years of smaller ones. The long accumulation of choosing not to ask because you preferred what not knowing allowed you to be. That doesn't make it better, she said. I believe you didn't know, but you chose not to know. And that's... She paused. That's its own thing. He looked at her. He had nothing to say to that. She didn't need him to. Go home, Ethan, she said. She turned back into the study where Taejun was standing with Mercer, and she closed that door behind her, not with anger, just with the quiet finality of a woman who had just put something down that she'd been carrying without knowing it. It took 3 hours to complete the night. Mercer worked with the precision and controlled momentum of someone who had been building toward this for a long time and understood that the hours immediately after a federal action were as important as the action itself. The documentation secured, the chain of custody verified, the agents debriefed, the legal architecture of the indictment reinforced against the first inevitable attempts to challenge it. Taejun stayed. Nia stayed. There were things Mercer needed from both of them. Nia's account of recovering the drive, Taejun's documentation of his operational involvement, the notarized statement from Park Soo-han that Jin-ho had secured and transmitted earlier in the evening. She went through it with them in the Caldwell dining room, the dinner plates not yet cleared, the candles burned low, the flowers beginning to droop at the edges, and the ordinary debris of an interrupted evening became the backdrop of a federal case that would take 2 years to fully prosecute. At 11:40 p.m., Mercer closed her folder. "You're done for tonight," she said. She looked at Nia. "There will be depositions, probably 3 or 4 sessions over the next several weeks. My office will contact you." "I know," Nia said. Mercer looked at her for a moment longer. The same look as that morning, recognition, the knowing of someone who had tracked this thing for 3 years and understood what it had cost. "Your father's documentation is going to be the spine of this prosecution," she said. "Every charge we bring, it goes back to what he built. His name will be in the record." Nia felt that move through her chest, slow and warm and aching. "Good," she said. He'd want that. Not for himself. He'd want it because he believed records mattered. He believed the truth of a thing should outlast the fight over it. Mercer nodded. She stood. She shook Taejun's hand and then Nia's, and there was something in the handshake that was more than professional. The handshake of people who had been in the same trench, who shared the knowledge of what it had taken. She left. The Caldwell dining room was very quiet. Taejun looked at this cleared space where Charles Caldwell had sat 2 hours ago with his amber glass and his controlled warmth, and then he looked at Nia. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked out through the front door together. The circular driveway was empty now except for Jin-ho and the car. The warm lamps were still burning, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath them. The night was cold and wet in the Seattle way. Not storming, just present. She stopped at the top of the steps. She took a breath. The cold air went all the way down. She held it for a moment, feeling her lungs with it, feeling the night, feeling the particular sensation of standing outside on the other side of something that had taken everything to get through. Taejun stopped beside her. He didn't say anything. He was very good at not saying anything when nothing was needed. She had noticed that about him early and had kept noticing it, the rarity of a man who understood that presence and silence were not the same as absence. "He finished it," she said, to no one in particular. "To the night." Taejun said nothing. He knew he wasn't going to make it to the end, she said. He knew when he built it, the way he built it. The pieces, the separate keepers, the letter and the birthday card. He knew he was building something he might not be alive to see completed. She paused. Her father's watch ran a little fast against her pulse. "He built it anyway." "Yes," Taejun said, "because the truth was worth building even if he didn't get to see it stand." "Yes." She looked out at the city, the dark shape of it beyond the Capitol Hill trees, the orange glow low on the clouds, Seattle being Seattle in the night, the city she'd been born in and grown up in and had never once thought about leaving because it had always simply been where she was, where her father was, where her mother was buried in a cemetery in Beacon Hill that she visited twice a year and sat with for an hour and didn't need to say anything at. She thought about her father's grave. She thought about what she was going to say when she sat with him next. "You finished it, Daddy. We finished it. The truth is standing." She breathed out. "Okay," she said. They went to the car. The penthouse was quiet when they got back. Jin-ho had come in behind them and then disappeared with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood the shape of a moment and knew when he was not part of it. Harriet was on the couch. She opened one eye when Nia came in, assessed the situation with the ancient indifference of a 12-year-old cat who had survived a kidnapping and a relocation in a strange man's lap and had decided the new arrangement was acceptable, and then closed the eye. Nia sat beside her. She put her hand on Harriet's flank, the old cat's warmth, the slow rise and fall of her breathing, and sat in the quiet of the penthouse with the city spread out beyond the windows and let the night decompress around her. Tae-jun brought her tea, not coffee. She noticed that he'd paid attention at some point to when she drank what. He set it on the table beside her and then sat in the chair across from the couch, not close but present, and they sat like that for a while in the way they'd learned over the past 4 days to sit with each other in the spaces between things. "What happens now?" she said. Not to him specifically, just out loud. "For the case, depositions, prosecution, probably 18 months to trial. Charles will try to negotiate a plea that protects certain assets. He won't succeed. The documentation is too complete." He paused. "For his organization, it's already fracturing. The people who worked adjacent to the Caldwells but maintain distance will move fast to establish that distance publicly. Within a week, the financial structure begins to collapse. For you," she said. She looked at him. "What happens for you?" He held her gaze. Park's statement, the documented account of the routing access being used without organizational knowledge, protects the Kang organization's formal liability. My legal exposure is limited. A pause. My operational exposure is more complicated. The Caldwells had reach into certain structures I operated adjacent to. Severing that cleanly will take time. And what about the other thing? She said. He was quiet. The routing structure my father documented, she said. The Vancouver company, the thing that connected your operation to theirs. She held his gaze because it needed to be held. That goes into the federal record. Mercer will have to address it. I know. Your name is going to be in the documentation. I know. She paused. That's a consequence you're walking into with your eyes open. Your father walked into a parking garage, he said. I think I can walk into a federal deposition. She looked at him for a long moment. That's not the same thing, she said. No, he agreed. It's considerably less than the same thing, which is the point. She understood what he was doing, not minimizing what he was accepting, but locating it correctly in the scale of what things cost. Her father had paid the highest price. Tae-jun was paying a portion of what was owed to the same truth. He was doing it without bargaining and without asking her to notice it, which meant she noticed it entirely. Thank you, she said. Don't, he said. Not harshly, just directly. You don't thank me for this. Your father trusted me with something I wasn't able to protect, and this... He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked once. This is the minimum. It's not the minimum, she said. You know it's not. He looked at her. He looked at his hands. He looked back at her. I've been thinking, he said, about what to say to you. Since the night I walked into that ballroom. I've been thinking... He stopped again, which was unusual for him. The stopping, the searching. He was not a man who ran out of language often. I've been trying to find the version of this that doesn't ask too much of you. She waited. Your father gave me instructions, he said, in the letter with Reeves. At the end of everything else, the case documentation, the chain of custody, the contact information, at the very end, in his handwriting. He looked at her with the directness that was simply how he inhabited the world, stripped of all the management. He wrote, take care of her, not because she needs it, because she deserves someone who chooses to. Nia felt that move through her in a slow, comprehensive wave. She thought about her father writing those words, the deliberateness of it. The man who had balanced his checkbook by hand and known that numbers told the truth about what people did, writing those words in the knowledge that he might not see what came after them, trusting a man he'd measured carefully and found, despite everything, to be worth trusting. He was meddling, she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, but she didn't try to make it something it wasn't. Yes, Tae-jun said. Something moved across his face that was not quite the smile from the kitchen 2 nights ago, but was related to it, something warmer and more complicated. He was the most strategic man I have ever met. He would have liked being called that. I know, he told me. She looked at him. He told you? In the second meeting, he said, a pause. He said he was a numbers man, but he'd spent his whole career watching people try to hide the truth in numbers and fail, because the truth always showed up eventually in what the numbers did. He said people were the same as numbers in that respect. The truth of a person showed up eventually in what they did. He held her gaze. He said he'd been watching what I did for 6 months, and he'd decided it meant something. She sat with that. Her father, in a room she'd never been in, looking at a man she hadn't met yet, doing the only kind of math he knew, the math of actions, of what people chose when the choices were real, deciding that the man across from him was worth trusting, worth more than trusting, meddling, strategically, lovingly, all the way to the end. "I'm not going to pretend the past 4 days were normal," she said. "They were not normal. I'm not going to pretend I know what any of this means yet." "You don't have to." "But I'm not leaving," she said. I want to say that plainly. I'm not leaving because of obligation. I'm not staying because I feel like I owe you something. She paused. "I want to know who you are outside of this, outside of the operation and the protection and the thing we built together in a crisis." She looked at him steadily. "I want to know what you cook. I want to know what you read. I want to know if you actually sleep or if you just stand at windows until it's morning." He looked at her for a long moment. "I cook Korean food badly and Italian food well," he said. "I read history, mostly military, some economic, and yes," he said, and the almost smile was fully present now, real and unheld, the face underneath all the management. "Sometimes I stand at windows." "I'm going to need you to sleep," she said. "I've been told," he said. She looked at him. This man who had walked through a door and stopped a room cold and kissed her in front of 300 people and given her his sweatshirt and sat across from her at midnight and told her the truth about things when the truth was not easy. And she thought, my father knew. He always knew. He did the math, and he got it right. The way he always got it right, and the last thing he did was make sure she'd find it. She reached out and picked up the tea he'd brought her. She drank it. It was exactly the right temperature. "The apartment," she said, "in Beacon Hill. I should go back." "When you're ready." "Not tonight." "No," he agreed. "Not tonight." She went back 3 days later. Jinho drove her. Taejun had asked. She had accepted. Not because she needed the escort, but because the idea of walking back into those rooms alone for the first time felt like something she should not do entirely without witness. The apartment was undisturbed on the surface. The professional search had been professional enough to leave it that way. But she knew now what she was looking for, and she found the small signs of it. A drawer not quite flush, a book a half-inch out of alignment on the shelf. The specific way someone had replaced things almost exactly right, but not quite. She stood in her kitchen and looked at her kitchen, the coffee maker, the student drawings on the table, the grocery list on the refrigerator in her handwriting, all the ordinary evidence of an ordinary life, and felt the complexity of it, the strange double nature of a space that had been both hers and violated, both familiar and strange. Harriet wound around her ankles. She reached down and picked her up, wrong side first because she always forgot, and Harriet made her protest sound and then settled against her shoulder and began to purr with the particular loud conviction of a cat who had decided that disruption was behind them. Nia stood in her kitchen and held her cat and breathed. She thought about what she was going home to and what she was going back to, the classroom, her students, the lesson plans on the table, the ordinary and necessary work of teaching 5-year-olds that numbers had meaning and words had power and the world was comprehensible if you paid close attention. She thought about the depositions ahead, the months of legal process, the long, careful work of justice moving at the speed justice moved when it was moving correctly. She thought about her father's grave. Tuesday. She'd go Tuesday. She thought about a penthouse 41 floors up, and a man who cooked Italian food well and stood at windows, and the way her name sounded when he said it like it was something he'd decided to be careful with. She was not the same woman who had put on a black dress 11 days ago and gone to an engagement party expecting the worst thing to be running into her ex. She was not smaller than that woman. She was not harder than her, not colder. She searched for the word and found the one her father would have used, the accountant's word, precise and unglamorous and exactly right. She was reconciled. The books balanced. The truth of what had happened was now in the record, in the light, standing where it could be seen. She was reconciled. The months moved the way months moved after a storm, not quickly back to normal because there was no back, only forward into the new configuration of things. The Caldwell indictments were unsealed 6 weeks after the dinner. 17 counts across Charles Caldwell and 4 senior members of his organization. The financial documentation Mercer's office submitted was described in the legal press as among the most comprehensive evidence packages ever compiled for a West Coast financial crime prosecution. The name Raymond Elias Brooks appeared in the public record as the principal investigator whose documentation formed the foundation of the case. Nia read that paragraph 3 times. Then she sent a copy of it to her aunt in Tacoma, her father's sister, who had been trying to understand for 6 months what her brother had been doing and why he died. And her aunt called her, and they talked for an hour, and her aunt cried. And Nia held the phone and let her, because it was right that someone should cry cleanly without holding it. Ethan Caldwell was not indicted. He was interviewed 3 times by federal investigators, and his separation from the operational core of his father's organization was documented. He left Seattle 4 months after the dinner. Nia heard from Danielle, who heard from Marcus, who didn't volunteer the information but answered when asked. He'd gone to Portland, or maybe San Francisco. Somewhere he could be someone whose father hadn't been the thing his father turned out to be. She thought about him, once, at the end of a Tuesday, in the classroom, when she was putting away the hand-cut paper shapes her students had made that day. Small, careful hands pressing scissors through construction paper. The specific concentration of 5-year-olds engaged with a task they'd decided mattered. She thought about Ethan, and felt the thing she'd felt in the doorway of the Caldwell study. Quiet. Just quiet. She put the paper shapes in the box and turned off the classroom light and went home. The depositions were 4 sessions over 6 weeks. Mercer ran them with the focused efficiency Nia had come to understand as simply how the woman inhabited her work. The questions were precise and sometimes difficult. The harder ones not about the evidence, but about her father, the reconstruction of his decisions and his movements and his state of mind in the months before he died. Nia answered them the way her father had built his documentation. Carefully, accurately, completely. In the 3rd session, Mercer looked at her across the deposition table and said, off the record, between the question and the next, "You're very much like him." "I know," Nia said. "I used to think that was the most ordinary thing about me." Mercer looked at her. "Now?" she said. "Now I think it's the best thing," Nia said. Taejun's deposition was separate from hers. His attorney managed the Vancouver routing documentation with the precision of someone who had prepared for exactly this challenge. Park's notarized statement, the operational audit demonstrating no knowledge of the access, the documentation of Park's termination, and the circumstances surrounding it. The federal investigators examined it for 3 weeks and concluded that the routing access had been a rogue internal compromise and not organizational policy. He told her about it on a Thursday evening in December, standing in his kitchen cooking pasta. He had not been exaggerating about the Italian food. She'd been eating it for 2 months and had stopped being surprised at how good it was. And he told it in the flat, factual way he told things that had cost him something. The outcome, the finding, the clean record. "And?" she said. "And that's the end of it," he said. "That's not what I'm asking." He looked at her from the stove. She was at the island, her laptop open to a stack of student assessment forms, because the depositions and the legal process had not actually paused her job, which she'd told him early on and which he'd accepted without argument, more than accepted, had built around it, had reorganized his schedule to accommodate it, had learned which night she needed quiet and which night she needed company, and had provided each without being asked. "I'm out of the Vancouver structures entirely," he said. "The organization is restructuring toward legitimate holdings. It will take..." A pause, the pasta being stirred. "Longer than I'd prefer, but it's the direction." "That's also not what I'm asking." He set down the spoon. He looked at her. "You want to know if I'm okay," he said. "I want to know if you're honest." A beat. "Park was with me for 11 years, he said. "He sat in my car and at my table and in every room where things that mattered were decided. And he..." He stopped. He picked the spoon back up. "Yes," he said. "I'm okay. It took some time, but I'm okay." She looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said. She looked back at her assessment forms. He looked back at the pasta. The kitchen was warm and smelled like garlic and something herbed. And outside the windows, Seattle was doing its winter thing. The low clouds, the ambient glow, the particular wet dark of December. She thought, this is what after looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, not the moment the credits roll. Just a kitchen, and garlic, and a man at a stove who cooked Italian food well and was being honest about being okay, and a cat asleep on the couch, and somewhere in a cemetery in Beacon Hill, a careful man who had trusted the math and gotten it right. This was what he'd built toward. Not just the case, not just the truth in the record. This, the kitchen, the ordinary evening, the after. She felt the watch on her wrist, still running a little fast. She still hadn't gotten it fixed. She was not going to. The wedding was in March. Not a large wedding, not the kind of event that announced itself, not the kind that required a ballroom or an event coordinator with a headset or 300 people making decisions about what to do with their discomfort. It was 30 people. Danielle and Marcus, her aunt from Tacoma, and her family, Tae-jun's sister who had flown in from Seoul, and who looked at her brother with an expression Nia recognized as the specific, complex love of someone who had worried about a person for a long time and was revising downward, his 3 closest people from his inner circle who were not Park Soo-han. Jin Ho, who stood near the back with his arms folded and the expression of a man who would not cry and was making it a point and was not entirely succeeding. Mercer came, not because she was close to either of them, but because she'd been there at the beginning of the end and it seemed right. And when Nia had called to ask, Mercer had said yes without hesitation and arrived in a blue dress that suggested she'd put genuine thought into it. The venue was a space in Capitol Hill, not the Caldwell House, not that street, not that neighborhood exactly, but Capitol Hill, because Nia had decided that she was not going to cede the geography of her city to anyone's history. Seattle was hers. She'd been born here. Her parents were buried here. She was going to get married here in March in the rain, which was the only honest way to get married in Seattle, and she did. Tae-jun was waiting at the end of a short aisle lined with people she loved, and when she walked toward him, she was not thinking about what he represented or what they'd been through or the strategic calculation that had begun with a kiss in a ballroom. She was thinking about a man who stood at windows, who brought her tea at the right temperature, who said her name like he'd decided to be careful with it. She was thinking about her father, who had trusted the math. Tae-jun watched her walk toward him with an expression that was not the composed stillness she'd first known him by. It was open, inhabited, the face underneath everything, the one she'd first fully seen in the aftermath of Park against the wall, the one he'd stopped managing around her. She reached him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Someone in the seats laughed softly. They said the words. They meant the words. When he put the ring on her finger, a different ring than the engagement ring she'd worn for 3 months as cover, because she'd asked for different and he'd understood why without being told. She felt the weight of it as only the weight of what it was, a choice, freely made by 2 people who had each paid enough for things to understand what it cost to choose without obligation. After, standing outside in the March rain that was doing exactly what Seattle rain did in March, not storming, just present, the soft, relentless damp of it, the orange glow low in the clouds, Tae-jun put his jacket around her shoulders without asking. She leaned into him. The city spread out below Capitol Hill, all its wet lights and its ordinary Friday evening life. People going to dinner, going home, moving through the streets without knowing anything had changed or been resolved, or that a careful man's truth was now in the federal record bearing his name. The city didn't know and didn't need to. The city just was. The way cities were, indifferent and enormous and beautiful, in the way of things that had outlasted everything that happened inside them. He would have said something embarrassing at the reception, Nia said. Tae-jun looked down at her. What kind of embarrassing? A toast, probably 8 minutes, with statistics. She paused. He would have found a way to work in something about accounting. A sound came from Tae-jun that was a laugh, a real one, not the almost smile, not the controlled almost. A real laugh, brief and warm and genuine. She felt it through his chest where she was leaning against him. I would have liked that, he said. I know, she said. He would have liked you, which would have annoyed him. She paused. He would have gotten over it. I know, he said. He told me. She looked up at him. When? The second meeting, he said. At the end. He said he'd decided I was probably insufferable, but probably worth it. The real smile again, inhabited and unheld. He said it like he was filing a report. She laughed. It moved through her clean and real, The laugh she'd felt strange in her chest 11 days into grief at an engagement party, the laugh that had come back, that had kept coming back over these months. That was one of the things her father had left behind, in the same way he'd left the drive and the letter and the careful documentation, not an artifact but a capacity, the ability to find the thing in the dark that was worth laughing at. She turned her face back to the city. Across Seattle, in the apartments and the offices and the houses of people whose lives had been built adjacent to the Caldwell organization's long reach, things were shifting. Financial ties severing, associations being quietly distanced, the particular reorganization of a world from which a load-bearing structure had been removed. It would take years to fully settle. Some things would not fully settle. That was the nature of what was real, as opposed to what was resolved. Charles Caldwell would stand trial in 14 months, and would not take the stand and would be convicted on 11 of 17 counts, and would spend the remainder of his life in a federal facility, in a small room very far from the Georgian colonial, with the warm lamps and the 3 generations of photographs in the hallway. He would not, in all those years, once speak publicly about Raymond Brooks. Raymond Brooks would not need him to. The record spoke. The numbers told the truth about what people did. The truth was standing. Nia Brooks Kang, she'd kept both because they were both hers, stood in the March rain with her husband's jacket around her shoulders and her father's watch on her wrist running a little fast. And she looked at the city her father had loved, the city she'd been born into, the city that had tried to swallow the truth and failed. And she felt the full weight of everything it had taken and everything it had given and everything that was still ahead. And she held it. She held it without putting it down, without pretending it was lighter than it was, without smoothing over the places where it was still rough and unresolved and would be for a long time yet. She held it the way her father had taught her, in the only way worth holding anything true, completely, and with both hands, and without looking away. The rain came down. The city went on being the city, and from somewhere behind them, inside the warm-lit venue, she heard Danielle's voice rising into a laugh that meant Jin-ho had been cornered into dancing, and she heard Tai-jun make a sound beside her that was recognition and amusement in equal measure, and she took his hand, and they went back inside.